At my best friend's funeral, my son-in-law whispered that it was time for me to surrender my fortune and fade away. He thought my grief made me weak. He thought I was just an old man ready to be put out to pasture. But the small locked steel box I held in my hands, a final gift from the grave, was about to prove him dead wrong. My name is Jake Rollins. I am 69 years old, and what I am about to tell you will forever change how you look at the people sitting at your dinner table. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Rain soaked through my black suit as the heavy thud of wet dirt hit Mark's wooden casket. 40 years of brotherhood were being buried right in front of my eyes. Standing beside me was Bradley Sutton, my white son-in-law. He squeezed my shoulder. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a heavy and calculated grip. He leaned in close, his expensive cologne masking the smell of damp earth. "Jake, it is a tragedy," he murmured, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Mark worked himself to death. You should not make the same mistake. It is time to let me handle the company and the properties. Sign the transfer papers this week. You need to rest and enjoy your golden years." I stared at the open grave, letting Bradley's words hang in the freezing air. He wanted my life's work. A commercial real estate empire I had built from nothing in Chicago with calloused hands and aching bones. Before I could formulate a response that would not cause a scene, a tall figure stepped between us. It was Richard Hayes, Mark's personal lawyer and our trusted associate for decades. Richard did not offer a warm greeting. His face was a mask of cold stone. He completely ignored Bradley, stepping in so close that my son-in-law was forced to drop his heavy hand from my shoulder and take an awkward step back. "Mr. Rollins," Richard said, his voice cutting through the sound of the pouring rain. Mark left specific instructions regarding his final effects. Bradley immediately puffed out his chest, stepping forward to assert his usual dominance. "Whatever it is, Richard, you can send it to my office. Jake is in no condition to deal with legal technicalities right now. I am handling all family affairs moving forward." Richard turned his head slowly, fixing Bradley with a stare so icy it could have frozen the raindrops mid-air. "My client did not employ you, Bradley, nor did he trust you. These instructions are for Jake alone." Bradley's face turned a mottled shade of red, his jaw clenching tight, but he stayed silent. Richard turned back to me. He reached inside his heavy wool trench coat and pulled out a small, heavy steel box. It was cold to the touch, secured by a 4-digit combination lock. He pressed it firmly into my hands, his eyes boring directly into mine with an intensity that made my heart race. He did not say another word out loud. He simply gave my hands a firm, meaningful squeeze, nodded once, and walked away into the sea of black umbrellas. I looked down at the cold steel box resting in my palms. The metal was heavy, solid, and completely unforgiving. As I ran my thumb over the 4 rigid dials of the combination lock, my mind raced back to the moment just before the funeral service began. Richard had brushed past me in the crowded church vestibule and subtly slipped a folded piece of paper into my coat pocket. I had read it in the privacy of the restroom. The message was brief, written in Richard's sharp handwriting. "Jake, open the box when you are absolutely alone. The code is the day you saved my life." A chill that had nothing to do with the freezing rain ran down my spine. 30 years ago, a massive scaffolding had collapsed on one of our commercial construction sites. I had physically pulled Richard from beneath a crushing steel beam, an event only Mark, Richard, and I ever spoke of. Why would Mark use that specific date as a lock? I clutched the box tighter against my chest, slipping it into the deep pocket of my overcoat. When I looked up, I caught Bradley staring at me. His eyes were narrowed, darting between my pocket and my face. The mask of the grieving, supportive son-in-law had completely vanished. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated greed mixed with intense suspicion. He hated not being in control. He hated that Mark, a man he constantly tried to outsmart, had bypassed him entirely. "What did that old fool give you?" Bradley asked, his voice dropping its polite tone, revealing the sharp, demanding edge he usually reserved for his subordinates. "Nothing that concerns you," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Just a personal keepsake." Bradley scoffed softly, shaking his head. "You need to be careful, Jake. Grief makes people vulnerable. You should let me hold on to that for safekeeping. We do not know what kind of mess Mark left behind." I looked him dead in the eye, channeling every ounce of authority I had used to run my business for 4 decades. "I can manage a small box, Bradley." He backed off, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. He was a predator who had just realized his prey might have found a weapon. The walk to the family SUV felt like a march toward an execution. My daughter Tasha was already sitting in the back seat applying a fresh coat of lip gloss, as if we had just left a casual brunch instead of her godfather's burial. I slid into the front passenger seat, feeling the heavy weight of the steel box in my coat pocket. Bradley climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. Before he could start the engine, I reached into the center console to grab my prescribed heart medication. I needed a pill to calm the rapid beating in my chest, but the familiar orange bottle was gone. "Looking for this?" Daddy Tasha asked from the back seat. I turned around. She was holding my prescription bottle. With a calm, unsettling smile, she casually tossed it into the small trash bin attached to the back of my seat. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice rising in shock. "Throwing away garbage," Tasha replied, smoothing her expensive designer skirt. "Bradley consulted a private specialist. He bought you a new imported medication. It is much better for your condition. We are starting you on it tonight." She spoke with the sweet, condescending tone one might use with a helpless toddler. Bradley smirked, putting the car in drive. "We only want what is best for you, Jake. You have to trust us." I sat perfectly still as the luxury SUV pulled away from the cemetery. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. I touched the heavy steel box hidden in my pocket. My best friend had died under suddenly mysterious circumstances. My son-in-law was desperate for my fortune, and my own flesh and blood had just thrown away my life-saving medicine with a smile. I looked at the two people I had trusted with my life and realized the horrifying truth. I was trapped in a moving car with two demons, and my only lifeline was locked inside a box. The drive back to my estate was a suffocating blur of polite, poisoned conversation. I kept my hand firmly inside my coat pocket, my fingers wrapped tightly around the cold metal of the box. As soon as we arrived, I excused myself immediately, citing extreme exhaustion from the emotional toll of the funeral, and retreated straight to my private study. I locked the heavy mahogany door behind me, the sharp click of the deadbolt echoing loudly in the silent room. I walked over to my solid oak desk and set the heavy steel box right under the warm, revealing glow of my brass reading lamp. My mind flashed back to a sweltering July afternoon 30 years ago. I remembered the deafening screech of bending metal and the choking cloud of dust. I remembered pulling Richard from beneath a collapsed steel beam with my bare hands while Mark held the remaining structure steady. We had forged a bond of blood and sweat that very day. I aligned the 4 rigid dials on the combination lock to that exact date: 0714. A soft mechanical click broke the tense silence of the room. The heavy lid finally popped open. I braced myself to find Mark's final will and testament, expecting to see dense legal jargon outlining his remaining properties and final wishes. Instead, the steel box contained a thick, heavy stack of official bank statements folded neatly beneath a small black USB drive. I picked up the papers, my thick, calloused fingers tracing the crisp edges of the top page. These hands had laid thousands of bricks, poured countless tons of concrete, and framed entire commercial districts across Chicago from the ground up. They had endured decades of freezing winters and scorching summers to build an unbreakable financial fortress for my family. But as my eyes scanned the top page of the document, those same strong hands began to tremble violently. These were not Mark's financial records. They were mine. Specifically, they were the master ledgers for my private retirement trust, an account Bradley had aggressively insisted on managing shortly after he married Tasha. I stared at the printed numbers, my breathing turning painfully shallow in my chest. Series of massive, unauthorized wire transfers leaped off the page like physical blows. $50,000 here, $150,000 there, all funneled into obscure shell companies I had never heard of over the span of the last 2 years. I flipped frantically to the final page, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The grand total was absolutely devastating. $2 million had been completely drained from my retirement fund. The money I had bled for the ultimate safety net I had built for my twilight years was entirely gone. Bradley had not just been offering unsolicited, greedy advice in the car. He had been actively bleeding me dry right under my nose for months. He had used my fatherly trust as a weapon against me. I felt a massive surge of hot, blinding rage rising in my chest. It was the kind of primal rage that makes a man want to break something with his bare hands. but I forced myself to take a deep, steadying breath. Mark had not given me this box just to show me I was being robbed blind. He had given me a weapon to fight back. I set the damning papers down and picked up the black USB drive. I powered up my desktop computer, the soft hum of the machine feeling unnaturally loud in the dead quiet of the study. I inserted the USB drive into the port, waiting for the system to read it. A single folder appeared on the screen, ominously labeled with my first name. I clicked it open. Inside was a meticulous, devastating digital trail of destruction that only a seasoned real estate mogul and loyal friend like Mark could have successfully pieced together. My best friend had spent the last agonizing months of his life secretly investigating the man sleeping under my roof. I opened the first spreadsheet in the folder. It was a comprehensive, damning breakdown of Bradley's supposedly elite venture capital firm. For years, Bradley had strutted around my house in expensive, tailored suits, constantly bragging about his high-yield investments and his highly exclusive client list. He had played the part of the brilliant financial prodigy to absolute perfection. But the documents flashing on my screen painted a horrifyingly different picture. Bradley's firm was completely hollow from the inside out. There were no lucrative startup investments. There were no high-performing tech portfolios. It was nothing but an elaborate, highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He was using the fresh capital from new investors solely to pay the fabricated returns of the older, demanding ones. And when the well of gullible new investors had started to run completely dry, he had quietly turned to his ultimate safety net. Me. My stolen $2 million had not been invested in any market. It had been systematically used to plug the gaping holes in his sinking ship, to pay off angry clients threatening lawsuits, and to maintain his lavish lifestyle of imported cars and custom-tailored suits. Tasha's ridiculously expensive designer skirt from the car ride suddenly flashed in my mind. Was my own daughter completely blind to her husband's massive fraud, or was she happily spending my stolen money alongside him? I scrolled through dozens of internal emails and encrypted bank routing numbers Mark had somehow managed to intercept. The evidence was irrefutable. Bradley was facing decades in federal prison if this information ever saw the light of day. His absolute desperation in the car, his highly aggressive push for me to immediately sign over my remaining commercial properties, it all made sickening perfect sense now. The Ponzi scheme was on the verge of total collapse, and my commercial real estate empire was the only thing that could save him from total ruin. At the very bottom of the digital folder was a single audio file. The timestamp showed it had been recorded just one day before Mark suffered his sudden, supposedly fatal stroke. I plugged in my headphones, ensuring absolutely no sound would leak through the heavy mahogany door of my study, and pressed play. A burst of static hissed through the speakers, followed by the heavy, ragged breathing of my oldest friend. Jake Mark's voice rasped, sounding incredibly weak and terrified, completely devoid of his usual booming confidence. "If you are hearing this, it means I ran out of time. I thought I could gather enough evidence to bury him legally before he noticed, but I was wrong." The sound of something heavy crashing to the floor echoed in the background of the recording. "Jake, they know I found out the truth about the missing millions and the fraud. My coffee this morning tasted unusually bitter, and my vision is already starting to blur drastically. I can barely stand up." Another loud thud echoed through the audio, much closer this time. "They are not waiting for you to sign those transfer papers, Jake. They are going to take your empire by force. Do not trust your new medication. Do not trust the food they give you. I hear heavy footsteps on the stairs right now, Jake. They are inside my house." The recording abruptly cut to a dead, terrifying silence. I sat completely frozen in my leather chair, the blood turning to absolute ice in my veins. My best friend had not died of a natural stroke. He had been brutally murdered to protect a multi-million-dollar lie, and the people who had poisoned him were currently sleeping right down the hall. I did not sleep a single second that night. The chilling sound of Mark's final desperate breaths echoed in my mind on an endless, agonizing loop. But when the morning sun finally broke through the heavy dark curtains of my study, I knew exactly what I had to do. I carefully locked the steel box, the damning bank statements, and the USB drive inside the hidden floor safe beneath my desk. When I walked into the kitchen, I was no longer a grieving best friend or a betrayed father. I was a man preparing for absolute war. Moments later, Tasha and Bradley walked through the front door carrying silver platters of a lavish, extravagant breakfast. They had brought everything I used to love: freshly baked croissants, imported cheeses, and an expensive roast of artisan coffee. They moved around my kitchen with practiced ease, playing the roles of deeply concerned, dutiful children to absolute perfection. Tasha poured my coffee with a gentle, loving smile while Bradley pulled out my chair, his face a mask of manufactured sympathy. They were putting on a spectacular show of love and devotion, completely unaware that I now knew they were ruthless, cold-blooded killers trying to steal my life. "We need to talk about your health, Daddy," Tasha said softly, sliding a plate of warm pastries toward me across the polished marble island. "You look completely exhausted. Losing Mark has taken a terrible, heavy toll on you." I took a slow sip of the black coffee, making sure to show a slight fabricated tremor in my hand as I lifted the mug. "I am just tired, Tasha. It has been a very long, difficult week." She reached across the counter and placed her perfectly manicured hand over mine. Her touch, which used to bring me immense fatherly comfort, now felt like the cold, calculating grip of a venomous snake preparing to strike. "Bradley and I are so incredibly worried about you," she continued, her voice dripping with artificial, sickening sweetness. "You have built an incredible empire from nothing, but the stress is simply too much for a man your age right now. We want to make sure you are fully protected." Bradley stepped forward, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed in a posture of casual, confident authority. He placed a thick, professionally bound legal document right next to my coffee mug. "It is just a standard medical power of attorney," Jake Bradley said smoothly, his tone remarkably calm for a man whose Ponzi scheme was on the verge of total collapse. "It just gives Tasha and me the legal authority to make healthcare and basic administrative decisions for you strictly in the event that the grief becomes too overwhelming or you experience a sudden medical emergency. We just want to be able to step in and care for you seamlessly if you break down." The sheer audacity of their plan was staggering. They were not waiting for me to naturally decline. They were actively trying to strip away my legal autonomy so they could take total control of my life, my health, and ultimately my massive real estate fortune. They wanted the legal power to commit me, sedate me, or worse, just like they had done to Mark. I stared at the document, the bold black letters mocking me. It was a death warrant disguised as an act of familial love. I knew that outright refusing to sign the document would instantly trigger their suspicions and accelerate whatever violent backup plan they had in store for me. I needed to buy myself time to build my counterattack. So I dug deep into my soul and delivered the acting performance of a lifetime. I let my shoulders slump forward, physically shrinking my broad, strong frame into the posture of a broken, defeated old man. I let out a long, shaky sigh, staring blankly at the paper, as if the dense legal text was simply too confusing for my grieving, fragile mind to process. "You really think this is necessary?" I mumbled, perfectly pitching my voice to sound frail and completely lost. "Absolutely." Daddy, Tasha cooed softly, uncapping a heavy gold fountain pen and pressing it directly into my palm. "It is just a precaution. We love you so much. We just want to take this heavy burden off your shoulders. Let us handle the stressful things so you can just focus on resting and recovering." I wrapped my thick, calloused fingers around the gold pen. I forced my hand to shake violently, mimicking the exact symptoms of a man whose nervous system was rapidly failing under the crushing weight of profound emotional trauma. I slowly lowered the tip of the pen toward the signature line at the bottom of the page. Out of the corner of my eye, I carefully watched Bradley. His carefully constructed mask of polite concern began to slip entirely. He leaned in closer, holding his breath completely. His eyes were wide, dilated, and burning with a terrifying, unadulterated greed. The sweat was visibly forming on his forehead. He was practically vibrating with anticipation, watching the pen hover mere millimeters above the paper. This single signature was his golden ticket out of federal prison. It was the key to my entire commercial real estate empire, the massive influx of capital he desperately needed to cover his multi-million-dollar fraud and pay off his angry, dangerous investors. He was so incredibly close to stealing everything I had bled for over the last 40 years. The air in the kitchen grew incredibly thick and tense. I let the pen touch the paper, leaving a tiny, trembling dot of black ink on the pristine white page. Just as I began to form the first letter of my name, I jerked my elbow violently outward, simulating a sudden, uncontrollable muscle spasm. My forearm slammed directly into the heavy ceramic coffee mug sitting on the counter. The dark, scalding hot liquid erupted across the marble island, completely flooding the legal document. The thick paper instantly soaked up the coffee, turning the crisp white pages into a soggy, ruined, illegible mess. "Damn it!" Bradley roared, entirely forgetting his polite, caring son-in-law routine. He slammed his fist down hard on the counter, his face twisting into an ugly snarl of pure, unfiltered rage as he frantically tried to snatch the ruined document away from the spreading puddle. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Tasha immediately shot him a sharp warning glare, silently commanding him to pull himself together. "Oh, Daddy, it is okay. It was just an accident," she said quickly, though her voice strained heavily to hide her deep, boiling frustration. As Bradley aggressively swiped at the mess with a handful of paper towels, muttering under his breath, his smartphone buzzed and lit up on the kitchen island right in my direct line of sight. I stared at the glowing screen. It was a push notification from an encrypted financial application. The text was crystal clear. "Mortgage transaction for the Rollins Commercial Building complete. $5 million transferred." My blood turned to absolute ice. The Rollins Building was the crown jewel of my real estate empire, a property I owned outright with zero debt. Bradley had not just been trying to get my signature for the future. He had already forged my authorization to take out a massive multi-million-dollar mortgage on my flagship property. They were liquidating my empire right beneath my feet, and the war was already escalating far beyond my control. I repeatedly apologized, my hands trembling deliberately as I grabbed a kitchen towel to dab at the ruined document. Bradley snatched his phone from the counter, his jaw tight, his eyes darting toward the door as he realized his $5 million lifeline might be significantly delayed by this mess. He stormed out of the kitchen without another word, aggressively claiming he had an urgent private call with his bank. Tasha quickly followed him, offering me a tight, incredibly fake smile before she left the room. Left completely alone in the kitchen, my frail facade instantly dropped. I stood up straight, my mind racing with absolute clarity. Bradley had already breached my defenses and leveraged my flagship property. I needed to act right now. I began mentally planning my next communication with Richard Hayes. I needed to build an impenetrable legal barricade around my remaining assets before Bradley and Tasha could liquidate my entire life and wipe out my legacy. I calmly threw the ruined power of attorney into the garbage, knowing my time was rapidly running out. By the time the afternoon rolled around, my daughter returned to the house, but she was not alone. Walking right behind her was a tall, heavily built woman in sterile white medical scrubs. Her face was entirely devoid of warmth, her eyes sharp and deeply calculating. Daddy Tasha announced her tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. "Since your motor skills are clearly deteriorating and you are having these little accidents, Bradley and I decided it is simply no longer safe for you to be alone. This is Laura. She is a highly recommended private nurse. She will live here with you to provide 24/7 care and monitoring." I looked directly at Laura. She did not offer a comforting smile or a gentle handshake. She simply assessed me, scanning my body and the room like a prison warden inspecting a newly assigned inmate. It was glaringly obvious that she possessed zero medical bedside manner. She was a highly paid mercenary brought in to be their constant eyes and ears. Tasha had realized I was becoming difficult to manage, a wild card that needed to be tightly controlled under the guise of healthcare. I nodded slowly, playing the part of the compliant, exhausted father who simply accepted his fate. "Thank you, Tasha," I whispered softly. "You are always looking out for me." Laura immediately took charge of my house. She confiscated my usual medications, claiming she needed to manage my daily dosage schedule perfectly. She positioned herself in the living room, a strategic vantage point where she could easily monitor the front door of the kitchen and the hallway leading directly to my private study. I was officially a hostage inside the very walls I had built with my own hands. Every step I took, every room I entered, Laura's cold, dead eyes followed me relentlessly. I could not even walk near the landline without her hovering nearby. But Tasha and Bradley had severely underestimated my resourcefulness. They thought bringing in a guard dog would render me completely powerless. They did not know about the prepaid burner phone Richard had discreetly dropped into my coat pocket at the cemetery. Late that evening, when Laura finally retreated to the guest bedroom, leaving her door cracked open to listen for my movements, I silently locked myself inside my master bathroom. I turned on the shower, letting the loud rush of water drown out any potential noise I might make. I sat on the edge of the cold porcelain bathtub and pulled the small plastic phone from my toiletry bag. I dialed a number I knew completely by heart, It belonged to an old, trusted contact, a senior executive at the central bank who owed his entire career trajectory to my early commercial investments. When he picked up, I bypassed all basic pleasantries. I gave him a strict verbal authorization code we had established decades ago for extreme financial emergencies. I ordered a complete, immediate freeze on all my personal credit lines and unattached liquid assets. I instructed him to flag any incoming transfer requests, especially those originating from Bradley's venture capital firm, for high-level fraud review. Next, I texted Richard using a secure, encrypted messaging application preloaded on the burner device. I informed him about the forged $5 million mortgage on the Rollins building that I had seen on Bradley's phone. Richard replied, instantly confirming he was drafting emergency injunctions to freeze the property titles through a quiet judicial order first thing in the morning. We were moving silently in the shadows, building a massive legal trap that would snap shut the moment Bradley tried to make his next major financial move. I deleted the messages, powered down the burner phone, and hid it carefully inside the hollow base of my electric shaving kit, confident my secret was safe. Around midnight, I lay perfectly still in my bed, regulating my breathing to simulate a deep sleep. Through the sliver of light coming from the hallway, I watched a shadow move toward the kitchen. I slipped out of bed and crept silently down the carpeted hall. Peeking around the corner, I saw Laura standing by the kitchen island. She was preparing my nightly glass of warm milk, a routine she had rigidly established since arriving hours earlier. But she was not just pouring milk. She pulled a small plastic vial from her pocket and emptied a fine white powder directly into the glass, stirring it vigorously until it completely dissolved. My stomach churned violently. The exact same method they used on Mark was now being deployed on me. I hurried back to bed before she turned around. Minutes later, she entered my room, placing the glass on my nightstand with a firm, cold reminder to drink it all. I waited until her footsteps faded down the hall. I quietly grabbed the glass, carried it to the adjoining bathroom, and poured the tainted milk straight down the sink drain, rinsing it thoroughly to remove any toxic residue. I went back to sleep, feeling a grim sense of victory, knowing I had outsmarted them. But that victory was brutally short-lived. The next morning, I opened my eyes to find Laura standing dead center at the foot of my bed. She was not wearing her usual sterile nurse uniform. She wore dark street clothes, her posture aggressive and intensely intimidating. My blood ran completely cold. In her right hand, she was tightly gripping the small black burner phone I had hidden inside my shaving kit. She stared down at me, her eyes filled with cold, calculating malice. "Who were you texting at 3 a.m, Mr. Rollins?" I sat up so fast my joints popped, grabbing the small black device right out of her thick hand. My heart was hammering, but my survival instinct immediately took over. I let my jaw go slack and widened my eyes in a display of total bewildered outrage. "What is this doing in my bathroom?" I yelled, my voice cracking perfectly with age and fabricated confusion. "Give me my phone back right now." Laura narrowed her eyes, stepping closer. "You were texting someone, Mr. Rollins. Unlock it. Show me the screen." I glared at her, jabbing my thick thumb repeatedly against the locked black screen. I typed in random numbers, letting the device buzz loudly with incorrect password errors. "I do not even know how to turn this damn thing on," I shouted, throwing the locked phone onto the mattress in a fit of manufactured senile frustration. "Tasha bought me this piece of junk months ago, and the numbers are too small. You tell my daughter I want my old phone back today." Laura stared at me hard for a very long minute. The burning suspicion in her eyes slowly dimmed, replaced by a look of sheer contempt for what she thought was a genuinely broken mind. She scoffed, snatched the locked phone off the bed, and walked out of the room. The senile old man routine had worked perfectly, but I knew I had permanently lost my direct line to Richard. Losing the burner phone was a severe blow, but I was not entirely cut off from the outside world. Before Laura had confiscated my primary devices, I had meticulously transferred the encrypted files from Mark's USB drive onto an old forgotten tablet hidden deep inside my closet floorboard. Later that afternoon, while Laura was comfortably distracted watching daytime television in the living room, I securely locked my bedroom door and powered up the device. I opened the secure digital portal Richard had established for me. The portal gave me direct, unfiltered access to the back-channel financial network Mark had been relentlessly investigating right before his murder. I began to trace the digital footprints of the $2 million that had been maliciously siphoned from my retirement fund. I expected to find a convoluted maze of shell companies pointing directly back to Bradley's failing venture capital firm. I expected to see his signature, his authorization codes, his greedy fingerprints all over my stolen wealth. It would have made perfect sense for the arrogant son-in-law to be the sole mastermind. But as I decrypted the final layer of the offshore banking records, the blood drained completely from my face. The routing numbers did not lead to Bradley. They bypassed his corporate firm entirely. The money had been funneled through a highly sophisticated sequence of international wire transfers deliberately structured to look like Bradley's corporate losses, but ultimately landing in a private, untouchable account in the Cayman Islands. I clicked on the master ledger to reveal the primary account holder. My hands shook violently as the data loaded on the screen. I held my breath, waiting to see Bradley Sutton in bold letters. Instead, the screen displayed a single undeniable name that made my stomach violently drop. Tasha Rollins. Every single dollar had been meticulously routed directly into my daughter's personal possession. The staggering realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The entire narrative I had constructed in my head was fundamentally wrong. I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes burned. My own flesh and blood. The little girl I had carried on my shoulders through the streets of Chicago. The daughter I had worked 40 grueling years to protect and provide for. She was not a tragic victim of her husband's boundless greed. She was the grand architect of this entire nightmare. I pulled up the corporate filings for Bradley's venture capital firm to verify my sickening theory. The puzzle pieces suddenly locked together with horrifying clarity. Bradley was strictly the public face, the smooth-talking, well-dressed white executive who projected an image of absolute financial security to their wealthy, unsuspecting investors. But he owned precisely 0% of the actual voting shares. Tasha held all the real equity through a series of complex blind trusts. Bradley was nothing more than a highly paid puppet, a convenient disposable legal shield constructed by my daughter to absorb all the criminal liability when the massive Ponzi scheme inevitably collapsed. She was the one who had drained my retirement. She was the one actively attempting to liquidate my commercial real estate empire. And it was Tasha who had orchestrated the brutal, calculated murder of my best friend when he got too close to her hidden offshore accounts. Every tear she had shed at the cemetery, every sweet word of concern she had whispered in my kitchen, every gentle touch on my arm was a calculated psychopathic performance. She was manipulating Bradley just as expertly as she was trying to manipulate me. She was deliberately using his desperation to do her dirty work, ensuring that his hands would be the ones covered in blood while hers remained perfectly clean. The sheer magnitude of her betrayal threatened to crush my chest completely. It is one thing to be robbed by an opportunistic, greedy son-in-law. It is an entirely different level of hell to realize the child you raised is a cold-blooded monster willing to poison you and your best friend for a bigger bank balance. I sat in the dim light of my bedroom, a profound, chilling numbness settling over my heart. The father who unconditionally loved Tasha died in that very moment, replaced entirely by a man demanding absolute justice. I needed to know exactly what their next move was. 2 days ago, before Laura had infested my house, I had quietly installed a micro-surveillance camera perfectly concealed inside the smoke detector in my main living room. I switched the tablet application to the live video feed. The living room was empty at first, but then the front door opened. Tasha marched inside, followed closely by a frantic, sweating Bradley. Laura wisely made herself scarce, retreating to the kitchen. Bradley grabbed Tasha by the arm, his face pale with absolute terror. "Tasha, we are out of time," he pleaded, his voice trembling violently. "The mortgage on the Rollins building is stalled in legal review. The money has not cleared. They are calling me every hour. We need your father to sign the direct transfer today." Tasha ripped her arm out of his grasp. She did not look like the loving, concerned daughter she played for the public. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, vicious rage. Without a single word of warning, she raised her hand and slapped Bradley across the face with such ferocious force that the sound cracked like a gunshot through the tablet speakers. Bradley stumbled backward, clutching his reddened cheek in stunned submission. "Do not tell me what we need to do," Tasha hissed, stepping into his personal space with terrifying dominance. "You are useless. You were supposed to handle the paperwork quietly. Now make that old man go crazy faster. Spike his food. Break his mind. I do not care what you have to do. The cartel's $5 million debt is not going to wait for him to die naturally, and if they do not get their money by Friday, they are going to kill us both." The next morning, Bradley's desperation manifested into aggressive, reckless action. He did not wait for my morning coffee to settle before marching into the kitchen with a stranger. The man wore a sharply tailored suit and carried a thick leather briefcase, his posture exuding a manufactured medical authority. Daddy Tasha said, her voice attempting a soothing tone that now made my skin crawl with disgust. "This is Dr. Sterling. He is a premier cognitive specialist. Bradley and I insisted he come evaluate you today. You have been so incredibly forgetful lately, and we need to ensure your mind is healthy." Bradley stood right behind the doctor, his arms crossed, his eyes darting nervously around the room. The cartel threat had clearly lit a massive fire under him. He needed me declared legally incompetent today, so he could bypass my frozen assets and sign the commercial deeds himself. "Doctor," Sterling offered a practiced hollow smile and placed a thick stack of evaluation forms on the kitchen island. "Mr. Rollins," he said smoothly, "this will only take a moment. We just need to establish your current cognitive baseline." I looked at the three of them, fully aware that this man was a highly paid mercenary brought in to steal my freedom. I slowly took a seat at the island, letting my hands tremble just enough to keep up the charade. Dr. Sterling clicked his pen and began asking standard patronizing questions. He asked me what day of the week it was, the current season, and the name of the sitting president. I gave him a blank, vacant stare. I deliberately mixed up the days, confidently stated we were in the middle of winter despite the stifling summer heat outside, and gave the name of a mayor from 30 years ago. Bradley smirked triumphantly in the background, already tasting his victory and his $5 million bailout. Then the doctor shifted his focus to assess my capacity for independence. "Mr. Rollins, if you had a complex financial decision to make, say managing a large real estate portfolio, how would you approach it?" This was the trap. If I acted confused here, he would sign the incompetency papers instantly. I stopped trembling. I leaned forward, locking my eyes directly onto Dr. Sterling's, completely dropping the senile facade. "Well, doctor, I would start by auditing the triple net leases across the commercial properties, ensuring our anchor tenants are locked into 10-year agreements with inflation-adjusted escalations. Then I would review the capitalization rates, comparing them against the current municipal bond yields to ensure the portfolio is not over-leveraged. Furthermore, if a supposedly elite venture capital firm tried to aggressively mortgage my flagship building without a structural liquidity analysis, I would immediately flag it as a fraudulent Ponzi scheme, masking a catastrophic debt deficit. I rattled off complex tax codes, zoning regulations, and specific asset depreciation schedules with the lethal precision of a seasoned billionaire. The doctor's smug smile vanished instantly. His pen stopped moving. He looked at me in absolute shock, then turned to glare at Bradley. A man suffering from severe dementia cannot dissect macroeconomic real estate theory flawlessly. The cognitive dissonance of my performance broke the doctor's entire evaluation. He could not legally certify a man as mentally incompetent when that same man just explained corporate tax evasion better than a certified accountant. Dr. Sterling aggressively shoved his papers back into his leather briefcase, his face flushed with deep professional embarrassment. He shot Bradley a furious, venomous look. "You told me he was severely impaired and completely detached from reality," the doctor hissed under his breath, walking rapidly toward the front door. "I cannot sign an affidavit of incompetency for a man who understands commercial amortization better than I do. Find another doctor to play your illegal games." The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him. Bradley stood frozen in the kitchen, completely panicked. His fast track to my fortune had just evaporated into thin air, and the ticking clock of his $5 million cartel debt was ringing deafeningly in his ears. He stormed out of the house without a single word, likely to frantically beg his dangerous creditors for more time. Tasha and I were left entirely alone in the kitchen. The air grew incredibly heavy. She knew the legal route had just failed spectacularly. But Tasha was a masterful chameleon, a sociopath capable of shifting her skin the moment a strategy collapsed. She stared at me for a long moment, her calculating eyes searching for a new angle of attack. Then her entire posture crumbled. The cold, ruthless woman I had watched slap her husband on the hidden camera vanished entirely. Her knees buckled. She dropped to the floor right beside my chair, burying her face deeply into my lap. She began to sob uncontrollably, her entire body shaking with violent, gut-wrenching heaves. "Daddy!" she wailed, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered agony. "I am so sorry. I did not want to tell you like this. I did not want to add to your grief over Mark." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on the arms of my chair. "What are you talking about, Tasha? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face, her mascara running in dark, tragic streaks. "It is my health, Daddy. The doctors found a tumor. It is malignant. I have early-stage cancer." She gripped my hands tightly, her tears soaking into my skin. "The prognosis is terrible if I stay here," she choked out, gasping for air between her dramatic sobs. "But there is an exclusive experimental treatment facility in Switzerland. They have a revolutionary cellular therapy that targets this exact mutation. It has a 90% success rate, but the American insurance companies will not cover a single dime of it because it is not officially approved yet." I stared down at the daughter I had raised, the little girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose college tuition I had paid in full. She was using the ultimate nightmare of any parent, the threat of losing a child, as a weapon of mass extortion. "I need $3 million, Daddy," she pleaded, burying her face back into my legs. "I need it wired directly into my personal overseas account by tomorrow morning to secure my spot in the program. If I do not get this treatment, I am going to die. Bradley is broke, his firm is struggling, and I have absolutely no one else to turn to. Please, Daddy, please save my life." I felt a cold, dark void open up in my chest. She knew my late wife, her own mother, had suffered a brutal, agonizing battle with cancer. She was weaponizing my deepest, most agonizing trauma, stabbing a rusted knife directly into my last remaining emotional weak point. She was banking entirely on a father's blind, unconditional love to finally drain my accounts and secure her grand escape. I stared down at the top of Tasha's head as she continued to heave with loud, fabricated sobs against my knees. A year ago, seeing my daughter cry like this would have shattered my heart into a million pieces. I would have moved heaven and earth, drained every single account, and sold every commercial building I owned to save her life. But now, knowing the sheer depths of her depravity, knowing she had orchestrated the ruthless murder of my best friend, I felt absolutely nothing. The warmth of a father's love had been completely extinguished, replaced by a massive glacier of cold, hard logic. I placed my hands on her shaking shoulders gently but firmly, pushing her back so I could look directly into her tear-streaked face. "Tasha," I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady and painfully pragmatic. $3 million is a massive amount of liquid capital. You know as well as I do that my wealth is tied up in commercial real estate and long-term trusts. I cannot simply authorize a wire transfer of that magnitude overnight without triggering massive federal flags. I need time to consult with my brokers and begin liquidating assets quietly. The banks will not allow an immediate withdrawal without a thorough, time-consuming review process. Tasha aggressively wiped her eyes, her act of desperation instantly hardening into sharp, barely concealed panic. "But I do not have time, Daddy," she insisted, her voice rising in a frantic pitch. "The clinic in Switzerland needs the deposit by tomorrow morning, or I lose my spot in the trial completely. You have to find a way to bypass the waiting periods. Call the bank president. You have the power to force the transfer right now." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands across my chest. I studied her face, searching for a single ounce of the sweet girl she used to be. There was nothing left but a ruthless predator wearing my daughter's skin. I lowered my voice, letting the absolute gravity of my words fill the silent kitchen. "When your mother was dying of cancer, she suffered through unimaginable agony every single day. The chemotherapy ravaged her body, and the pain was a constant, suffocating nightmare. Yet she never once asked me to drain our life savings for some miracle cure overseas. Do you remember what her only dying wish was?" Tasha blinked momentarily, thrown off balance by the sudden heavy shift in the conversation. She swallowed hard, but stayed silent. "Her only wish," I continued, my voice sharp and cutting like a blade, "was to live just long enough to see you walk across that stage and get your college diploma. She endured months of hellish pain without asking for a single dime just for you. So I have to ask you a very direct question, Tasha. Do you actually need $3 million for an experimental medical treatment, or does Bradley need it to pay off a massive debt to the cartel?" The temperature in the room plummeted. Tasha froze entirely. The dramatic tears instantly stopped flowing. Her perfectly manicured hands tightened into rigid white-knuckled fists on her lap. The deliberate mention of Bradley's cartel debt was a tactical strike, a warning shot to let her know her perfectly constructed walls were crumbling. I watched the gears turning violently behind her eyes as she tried to calculate exactly how much I truly knew. "How dare you!" she spat, her voice dropping, the victim routine completely replaced by a venomous defensive hiss. "I am sitting here telling you I am fighting for my life, and you are accusing my husband of gambling with dangerous criminals. You have lost your mind. You really are going senile." She scrambled to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the expensive hardwood floor. She did not bother to wipe the remaining mascara from her cheeks. She glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, a look that confirmed every single dark truth I had uncovered. "Keep your money," she snarled, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "I will find a way to survive without you, just like I always have." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the kitchen, her heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway before the front door slammed shut with a house-shaking thud. As soon as she was gone, I moved into immediate action. I went back to my bedroom, carefully bypassing the lurking presence of Laura, who was blissfully distracted by a television program in the living room. I retrieved my hidden tablet and sent a secure encrypted message to Richard Hayes. I needed him to utilize his top-tier private investigator immediately. I typed out a quick, urgent command. Hack into the state medical database and run a full comprehensive scan on Tasha Rollins Sutton. Pull every chart, every blood test, every doctor visit from the last 5 years. I need her absolute medical truth right now. I paced the floor of my bedroom for 2 agonizing hours waiting for the results. My mind raced with the logistical nightmare of taking down my own child. Finally, a secure notification popped up on the tablet screen. The investigator had delivered a heavily encrypted digital file containing Tasha's complete medical history. I opened the document and scanned the official physician summaries. The results were exactly what I had grimly anticipated. Tasha had visited a premium private clinic just 2 weeks ago for a comprehensive full-body executive physical. Her blood work was flawless. Her scans were completely clear. She was not dying of cancer. She was in absolute peak physical health. The entire terminal illness story was a meticulously calculated psychopathic fabrication designed solely to extort millions of dollars from a grieving father. But the private investigator did not just stop at her medical records. Another file materialized on my screen labeled with high-priority, urgent flags. Richard had ordered a deep dive into her recent financial transactions, specifically looking for any sudden overseas expenditures related to her supposed Swiss medical clinic. I clicked on the attached image, expecting to see a receipt for an offshore banking fee or perhaps a down payment on a luxury foreign medical estate. Instead, I found a high-resolution screenshot of a confirmed airline booking. It was an international itinerary for a first-class flight departing from Chicago O'Hare Airport tomorrow night. The destination was Dubai, a city known for its incredibly strict banking secrecy and its notoriously difficult extradition treaties. But the destination was not the most shocking part of the document. I looked closely at the passenger manifest. I expected to see 2 names listed for the premium suite on the Emirates flight. I expected Tasha and Bradley to be fleeing the country together, escaping the collapsing Ponzi scheme and the violent threats of the cartel. But there was only one name printed on the confirmed boarding pass: Tasha Rollins. She had absolutely no intention of taking her husband with her. She had manipulated Bradley into doing all the dirty work, pushing him to forge commercial real estate documents and threaten me while she quietly set up her own solo escape route. She was planning to drain my accounts, take the remaining millions, and completely abandon Bradley to the ruthless cartel hitman. She was leaving him behind to take the fall and face certain death. My daughter was not just a thief and a murderer. She was an apex predator who consumed everyone in her path, including the man she married. The digital clock on my nightstand flashed 2 o'clock in the morning when the heavy oak front door of my estate violently crashed open. The deafening sound echoed through the silent, cavernous halls like a bomb detonating in the dead of night. I did not even have time to reach for the bedside lamp before heavy, frantic footsteps thundered down the corridor directly toward my private study. Bradley burst into the room, kicking the door wide open. He looked absolutely nothing like the polished, arrogant, and highly composed venture capitalist who had sneered at me in the cemetery just days ago. His expensive tailored suit was thoroughly crumpled and stained with large dark patches of nervous sweat. His silk tie was ripped completely off his collar, torn open, exposing his red, blotchy neck. He was gasping aggressively for air, his chest heaving violently up and down as if he had just sprinted for several miles to escape the devil himself. The polite, carefully constructed facade he had maintained for years was entirely stripped away. In its place stood a desperate, cornered animal. The cartel hitmen were rapidly closing in on him, and the ticking clock on his $5 million debt had clearly run out of time. He locked his bloodshot, manic eyes on me, radiating a chaotic, dangerous energy that completely sucked the oxygen out of the room. Bradley did not bother with pleasantries or the sickening fake sympathy he usually employed to manipulate me. He lunged straight toward my heavy oak desk, his hands shaking so violently he knocked over a solid brass reading lamp, sending it crashing to the floor. He reached into his ruined suit jacket and aggressively pulled out a thick stack of deeply crumpled legal documents. He slammed them down onto the polished wood surface right in front of me with a deafening smack. It was the master deed transfer for the very last unencumbered commercial tower in my entire real estate portfolio. "Sign the papers right now," Jake Bradley demanded, his voice a frantic, high-pitched snarl that cracked with sheer, unadulterated panic. "I do not have time for your senile act anymore. They are right outside. They are going to kill me tonight if I do not wire that money to their offshore accounts immediately." I remained seated in the dark leather chair, projecting a cold calm I did not truly feel. I looked from the papers up to his panicked, sweaty face. "I cannot sign away a commercial property at 2 a.m, Bradley. The banks are closed. The legal review process takes weeks to clear fraud prevention protocols." Bradley let out a terrifying, unhinged scream of frustration. He grabbed the framed family photograph sitting on the corner of my desk. It was a vintage picture of my late wife, Nadine, holding a much younger, innocent Tasha. Bradley hurled the heavy silver frame directly against the stone fireplace. The glass shattered into 1,000 tiny, jagged pieces, raining down across the expensive Persian rug in a sharp cascade. The violent crash forced Laura out of her guest room down the hall, but Bradley instantly spun around and roared at her to get the hell back inside and lock her door. The mercenary nurse, sensing the absolute lethal desperation radiating from him, quickly retreated without a single word. He turned back to me, planting both of his sweaty hands flat on my desk, leaning in so close I could smell the stale alcohol and sheer terror rolling off his skin. "You do not understand the people I am dealing with," he hissed, spitting the angry words directly into my face. "They will not just kill me, they will come for Tasha. They will come for you. They will burn this entire estate to the ground with you trapped inside it. Sign the paper right now and you get to live your pathetic final years in peace. Do it, or I swear I will make you regret it forever." I looked down at the shattered glass covering my wife's smiling face on the floor. I looked back at the frantic, pathetic excuse for a man demanding my life's work to cover his own colossal criminal failures. He genuinely believed I was just a fragile, broken old man who would easily fold under a cheap physical threat. He had completely forgotten who he was dealing with. I did not shake. I did not stutter. I dropped the senile facade entirely. I stood up from my leather chair so fast the heavy wood skidded violently backward across the floor. Before Bradley could even process the sudden explosive shift in my demeanor, I reached across the wide desk and grabbed him directly by the collar of his expensive ruined shirt. I twisted the fabric tight, instantly cutting off his air supply, and yanked his tall, lanky frame straight over the top of the desk. I am 69 years old, but my body was forged by 40 relentless years of hauling concrete, swinging sledgehammers, and framing heavy commercial steel. The brute, raw strength of a career construction worker does not just fade away with age. I drove him backward with terrifying force, slamming his spine violently against the solid mahogany wall of my study. The brutal impact knocked the wind completely out of his lungs in a loud, pathetic wheeze. His expensive leather shoes actually lifted an inch off the ground as I pinned him there, my thick forearm pressed brutally against his throat. His bloodshot eyes bulged out of his head in absolute shock. He scrambled wildly, his soft, manicured hands frantically clawing at my thick wrists, but my grip was an unbreakable iron vise. "You listen to me very carefully, you pathetic coward," I growled, my voice a deep, lethal rumble that echoed menacingly off the walls. "You come into my house, you break my wife's picture, and you think you can threaten me with a cartel debt that you alone created. I know exactly what your venture capital firm really is. I know all about the massive Ponzi scheme, and I know you do not have a single ounce of real power left." With my free hand, I reached over, grabbed the crumpled transfer deed off the desk, and aggressively crushed it into a tight ball. I threw it directly into the trash can next to my leg. "You are getting absolutely nothing from me." For a brief second, pure, unfiltered terror paralyzed Bradley's face as he realized I knew the absolute truth about his massive financial fraud. But then, as he struggled to breathe against the crushing weight of my forearm, a dark, twisted change washed over his entire expression. The panic slowly melted away, replaced by a sick, maniacal grin that stretched uncomfortably across his face. He began to laugh. It was a terrifying, breathless chuckle that bubbled up from the darkest depths of a desperate, utterly broken mind. I released my grip just enough to let him drop back onto the floor. He stumbled heavily, catching himself against the wall. He wiped a thin trail of dark blood from his cracked lower lip where his teeth had violently bitten down during the impact. "You think you have all the cards, Jake," he panted, a manic, deranged light dancing dangerously in his eyes. "You think you are so incredibly smart because you figured out the money trail. But you do not know how far we are actually willing to go to get what we want." Bradley reached into his back pocket with a trembling hand and pulled out a small, glossy photograph. He slapped it down onto the pristine surface of my desk. I looked down, and the breath left my lungs entirely. It was a high-resolution, secretly taken surveillance photo of Mark. He was sitting alone at his kitchen table holding a coffee mug halfway to his mouth. The digital timestamp on the bottom corner indicated it was taken on the exact morning of his supposed fatal stroke. Mark looked pale, disoriented, completely unaware that he was drinking a lethal, untraceable toxin. "You see that," Bradley whispered, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated malice. "We watched him drink every last drop. He did not suspect a single thing until his heart gave out on the kitchen floor. If you do not dig that paper out of the trash and sign your name right now, you are going to follow your best friend directly into the grave. The exact same poison is sitting right inside the trunk of my car, and I am not leaving this estate tonight until one of us is dead." I did not flinch. I did not blink. Staring down at the glossy surveillance photograph of my murdered best friend, the agonizing, primal urge to snap Bradley's neck right then and there was almost overpowering. The blood roared in my ears, and my heavy fists tightened at my sides. But I am a master builder, and I know from decades of harsh experience that tearing down a heavy structure recklessly only guarantees you will be crushed to death in the falling rubble. I needed the foundation of their entire criminal lives to collapse perfectly. What Bradley did not realize in the midst of his manic, adrenaline-fueled rant was that a high-definition voice-activated digital recorder was firmly taped to the underside of my solid oak desk. It had captured every single syllable of his unhinged, violent threat. He had just handed me the ultimate murder weapon on a silver platter, wrapping his own neck in an inescapable legal noose. I let out a long, ragged breath, forcing my broad shoulders to slump forward in an extreme theatrical display of total broken defeat. I raised my hands slowly, palms facing outward, stepping back from the desk as if his threat had completely shattered my spirit. "You win, Bradley," I whispered, injecting a heavy, convincing dose of fabricated fear into my trembling voice. "I do not want to end up like Mark. Just put the poison away. I will give you whatever you want." Bradley let out a sharp, triumphant bark of laughter, wiping the remaining streak of dark blood from his cracked lip. He pointed a trembling, arrogant finger at the trash can. "Then, dig that paper out of the garbage and sign it right now," he demanded, his chest puffing out with manufactured bravado. I shook my head, projecting the calm, weary logic of a defeated, seasoned businessman trying to mitigate a disaster. "You know as well as I do that submitting a heavily crumpled, coffee-stained document retrieved from a garbage bin to a federal bank will instantly trigger a massive corporate fraud investigation," I explained quietly. "If you want this $5 million transfer to clear fast enough to satisfy a ruthless cartel, the documentation has to be absolutely airtight. The annual Rollins Construction Anniversary Gala is this Saturday night at the Downtown Grand Hotel. The entire corporate board, my personal notaries, and the local financial press will all be there. I will have my top legal team draft pristine, expedited property transfer documents. I will sign the flagship commercial building over to your firm, publicly framing it to the press as an early retirement succession plan. It will look like a completely legitimate, celebrated corporate handover. There will be 0 red flags, no frozen assets from suspicious midnight transfers. You get your money completely clean by Monday morning, and your creditors will back off the second they see the press release." Bradley stared at me, his chest still heaving heavily, furiously analyzing the proposal. His blinding greed and his absolute desperation quickly overrode whatever lingering caution he still possessed. He smoothed down his ruined suit jacket, aggressively running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. The idea of a legitimate, publicly witnessed transfer appealed directly to his massive ego and his desperate need to keep the federal authorities off his back. "You are finally using your brain. Old man," he sneered, his arrogant superiority complex instantly returning. "Have the official documents ready before the first champagne toast. If you try to cross me, or if you call the cops, Tasha and I will make sure your final days are spent screaming, strapped to a bed in a locked psychiatric ward." He turned on his heel and marched out of the study, entirely convinced he had just masterfully dominated the situation and secured his salvation. I listened to his heavy footsteps echo down the hall, followed by the loud slam of the front door. He genuinely thought he had won the war. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. The very moment the red taillights of Bradley's car faded down the long, dark driveway, my defeated posture vanished entirely. I dropped to my knees, reached under the heavy oak desk, and ripped down the small digital recorder. I retreated to my bedroom, bypassing the sleeping mercenary nurse, and plugged the device directly into the secure tablet hidden in my closet. My heart pounded with a cold, calculated rhythm as I accessed the files. I played the audio back through my headphones to verify the capture. The sound quality was absolutely flawless. Bradley's vicious, arrogant voice bragging about poisoning Mark and threatening my life with the exact same lethal toxin echoed crystal clear through the small speakers. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof of premeditated first-degree murder and violent extortion. I immediately opened the encrypted messaging portal and attached the heavy audio file, sending it directly to Richard Hayes. I followed it up with a rapid, highly detailed text message. "I have the murder confession. Bradley just admitted to poisoning Mark and threatened my life with the same chemical agent. The primary motive is his collapsing Ponzi scheme and a massive cartel debt. Compile this audio file with the offshore banking records proving Tasha's millions in embezzlement. Prepare the master criminal dossier tonight. We are going to bypass the local police entirely and take this straight to your senior contacts at the FBI field office first thing tomorrow morning. We drop the federal hammer on both of them before Saturday's gala even begins." I sat back on the edge of my mattress, watching the green progress bar on the screen as the massive data packet encrypted and transmitted through the secure underground network. The progress bar hit 100%. The message was officially marked as delivered and read. A profound, heavy sense of absolute relief washed over my tired bones. The steel net was finally cast. I had successfully cornered two ruthless killers without firing a single physical shot. I had protected my lifelong empire and secured the ultimate justice for my murdered best friend. For the first time since staring down into Mark's open grave, I felt like I could finally breathe clean air. I stared at the glowing tablet, waiting for Richard's usual swift, highly professional response, confirming the time for our FBI meeting. The tablet screen suddenly flashed brightly, illuminating the dark corners of my bedroom. A high-priority incoming encrypted message from Richard appeared on the display. I clicked it open fully, expecting a solid confirmation of our tactical federal strike. Instead, the words materializing on the screen made the blood drain entirely from my face, replacing my brief victory with sheer, suffocating terror. The text was frantic, filled with uncharacteristic typographical errors, completely lacking Richard's usual composed, meticulous legal structure. "Jake, do not go to the FBI. Do not contact this encrypted number ever again. The police just kicked down the heavy glass doors to my law firm. They are aggressively seizing all my corporate servers, my private client files, and my personal hard drives." Tasha beat us to the punch. She fabricated an incredibly sophisticated, flawless paper trail framing me for the massive embezzlement of Mark's private estate. "They are arresting me right now for stealing the $2 million. My legal authority is completely suspended and all my firm's assets are frozen indefinitely. I am being taken into federal custody in handcuffs. You are entirely on your own. Do not trust anyone." The secure connection abruptly terminated, displaying a stark red error message indicating the network had been completely severed and destroyed from the other side. I stared at the dead black screen, a sickening wave of absolute dread crashing over me. Tasha had not just been quietly planning her solo escape to Dubai. She had been actively neutralizing every single one of my powerful allies. She had anticipated my secret partnership with Richard and flawlessly eliminated my only legal shield using the very money she stole to frame an innocent man and silence him forever. My impenetrable legal barricade was completely destroyed, and I was trapped in an isolated estate with a hired mercenary nurse, an arrogant killer son-in-law, and a daughter whose psychopathic brilliance far exceeded my absolute worst nightmares. The glowing screen faded to black, leaving me in total darkness. The silence of the house pressed heavily against my chest. I was entirely alone. My most trusted friend was dead in the ground. My legal shield was currently sitting in a federal holding cell framed by the very person I had brought into this world. Tasha had orchestrated a flawless decapitation strike against my defenses. Her psychopathic brilliance was absolutely staggering. She had anticipated every legal maneuver and neutralized it with ruthless, devastating efficiency. I could no longer rely on the justice system or external allies to fight this war. If I sat here waiting for the FBI to sort out Richard's innocence, Tasha would board her first-class flight to Dubai with the entirety of my life's work. She would leave Bradley behind to murder me in a desperate bid to satisfy his violent cartel debt. I could not stay in this bedroom waiting to be poisoned like an unwanted dog. I had to rip the weapon directly out of her hands. The only language Tasha and Bradley truly understood was money. I had to cut off their financial oxygen supply immediately. I had to do it myself. I waited until the early hours of the morning, long after the sun had risen, listening intently to the sounds of the house. Laura had established a very predictable, rigid routine. At precisely 8 o'clock every morning, she went to the kitchen to prepare my heavily drugged breakfast and took exactly 15 minutes to brew her own specialty tea. It was a small, arrogant window of complacency, and it was the only opening I needed. I dressed quickly in a sharp charcoal suit, casting aside the oversized, pathetic sweatpants they had forced me to wear to complete my senile aesthetic. I unlocked my bedroom window and slid the glass pane open. The drop was low, landing me softly onto the damp grass of the side garden. I kept low moving with a silent, aggressive urgency that defied my 69 years. I bypassed the main driveway, walking straight through the thick tree line that bordered my expansive estate. I reached the neglected service road where my old, reliable backup sedan was parked beneath a heavy tarp. It was a vehicle Tasha had completely forgotten existed. I pulled the tarp back, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. The engine purred to life with a quiet, steady hum. I drove out of the suburban enclave, keeping my eyes glued to the rearview mirror to ensure Laura was not chasing after me. I merged onto the main highway, heading straight for the towering skyscrapers of downtown Chicago. I navigated the morning traffic with absolute aggressive precision. Every minute that passed was another minute Tasha could use to finalize her fraudulent mortgage or liquidate my remaining checking accounts. I pulled up to the gleaming glass and steel headquarters of the First National Central Bank. This was not a local retail branch for common deposits. This was the fortress where the ultra-wealthy stored their untouchable assets. I parked the car, adjusted my tie, and walked through the heavy revolving doors with the towering posture of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. The marble floors echoed with my determined footsteps. I was no longer the helpless victim trapped in a suburban prison. I was the architect of their total financial destruction. I did not approach the standard teller lines on the main floor. I walked directly to the private elevators and hit the button for the executive suite. A massive security guard stepped forward to intercept me, but I swiftly flashed a heavy, embossed black titanium card. It was a secondary failsafe I had found taped to the false bottom of Mark's steel box, accompanied by a string of high-security authorization codes. Mark had not just left me a warning about my impending murder. He had meticulously left me a fully established, impenetrable financial bunker. The guard immediately stepped aside, recognizing the rare clearance level. I rode the elevator to the top floor and was escorted directly into a massive glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. A senior wealth manager entered moments later, his expression a mix of surprise and strict professional courtesy. I placed the black titanium card on the polished mahogany table and gave him the exact verbal passphrase Mark had designated for total asset lockdown. The manager's eyes widened slightly, but he immediately opened his secure terminal and rapidly typed in the clearance codes. Mr. Rollins, the manager said, his tone steeped in absolute deference. This protocol authorizes a complete, irrevocable migration of all your domestic liquid assets and commercial real estate titles into the offshore sovereign trust established by Mr. Holloway. Once this massive transaction is initiated, the assets cannot be seized, frozen, or transferred by any domestic power of attorney, familial claim, or federal mandate. They will exist entirely outside the reach of the United States legal system. Do you wish to execute the transfer immediately? I nodded firmly, my jaw set like stone. Execute it right now. Leave them absolutely nothing. I sat in tense silence as the manager typed furiously across his keyboard. On the large monitor on the wall, I watched my entire life's work shift across the globe in real time. The massive cash reserves from my accounts, the valuable titles to my commercial properties, the immense equity of the Rollins construction empire. It all instantly vanished from the domestic banking system. It was securely locked inside a blind international trust. Tasha's forged mortgage applications would immediately bounce back as criminally invalid. Bradley's desperate attempts to wire money to his cartel creditors would hit a massive brick wall of insufficient funds. The manager hit the final key, locking the system down completely. "The transfer is finished, Mr. Rollins," he announced quietly. "Your legacy is absolutely untouchable." I stood up, feeling a profound sense of absolute power. I had just financially decapitated my psychopathic daughter. I left the executive suite and rode the glass elevator back down to the main lobby. The heavy adrenaline pumping through my veins made me feel 20 years younger. I had single-handedly dismantled their entire criminal enterprise in less than an hour. Tasha was going to check her offshore banking applications and find a catastrophic zero balance. Bradley was going to realize the cartel was going to collect their massive debt in blood. The war of the bank accounts was officially over, and I had emerged completely victorious. I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped out onto the wide concrete steps of the bank plaza. The bustling noise of downtown Chicago hit me instantly. Pedestrians hurried past with coffee cups. Yellow taxis honked aggressively in the crowded streets. I took a deep, refreshing breath of the crisp morning air, preparing to walk back to my hidden car and watch their empire burn to ashes. Suddenly, the deafening, violent roar of a high-performance engine shattered the ambient city noise. I turned my head sharply toward the busy street. A massive matte black SUV with heavily tinted windows and absolutely no license plates tore out of the chaotic traffic. It did not slow down or brake. It aggressively jumped the high concrete curb, its massive tires crushing a metal newspaper stand into twisted debris. Innocent people screamed and scattered wildly in every direction, diving out of the path of the roaring machine. The black vehicle accelerated fiercely, its engine screaming like a mechanical beast unleashed from hell. It was not a random traffic accident. The driver had a specific calculated target. The heavy reinforced steel grille of the SUV was aimed directly at my chest, closing the short distance at a terrifying lethal speed. The massive black machine barreled toward me with the undeniable intent to kill. Time seemed to drastically slow down. 40 years of navigating highly chaotic, incredibly dangerous commercial construction sites had hardwired a primal survival instinct deep into my nervous system. I did not freeze like a helpless deer. I threw my entire body weight violently to the left, launching myself off the concrete steps and diving hard onto the solid pavement of the banking plaza. The rushing air from the heavy vehicle violently whipped across my face as it narrowly missed my chest by mere inches. The heavy SUV slammed brutally into a solid steel fire hydrant right where I had been standing a fraction of a second prior. A massive geyser of high-pressure water erupted instantly into the air, raining down on the panicked crowd. The driver did not hesitate or step out to finish the job. The heavy engine roared again as the vehicle aggressively reversed tires, screeching wildly against the wet concrete before speeding off and disappearing completely into the chaotic maze of downtown Chicago traffic. I lay on the wet pavement, my chest heaving, ignoring the sharp, stinging pain radiating from a deep scrape along my right forearm. I was alive. Sirens wailed in the distance, quickly converging on the flooded plaza. Panicked bystanders rushed to my side, shouting for a doctor, but I waved them off aggressively, pushing myself up into a seated position against a heavy stone pillar. A highly calculated, incredibly ruthless plan sparked brilliantly in my mind. Tasha had just deployed her final, desperate, violent measure to eliminate me before she boarded her luxurious flight to Dubai. She needed me entirely out of the picture to finalize her fraudulent takeovers. If she found out I survived with nothing but a bruised arm and a torn suit, she would immediately vanish into the wind, evading federal justice and escaping with whatever illicit cash she already possessed. I needed to trap her in a confined space where she felt completely victorious and totally unobserved. When the first team of paramedics and uniformed police officers arrived on the chaotic scene, I immediately pulled the commanding police captain aside. I recognized him instantly from my years of aggressively funding the city police pension program and supporting local precinct charities. I looked him dead in the eye and laid out my situation with absolute, undeniable authority. I told him the hit and run was a targeted corporate assassination attempt orchestrated by my own blood family. I told him I needed to completely fake my own impending death to catch the psychopathic architect of this entire nightmare red-handed. The captain hesitated for only a fraction of a second before nodding in strict agreement, recognizing the extreme gravity of the situation and my prominent standing in the city. Within minutes, the official narrative was entirely rewritten and aggressively broadcasted across the police radios. The emergency dispatch reported that prominent Chicago real estate mogul Jake Rollins had suffered a catastrophic, life-threatening head injury in a brutal hit and run. I was loaded onto a stretcher, perfectly performing the role of an unconscious, fading victim. The paramedics actively collaborated with the deception, applying heavy bandages and a rigid neck brace to expertly sell the illusion. The official medical bulletin leaked to the press, and my immediate family was highly specific and absolutely devastating. I was in a deep, irreversible coma. I had sustained massive brain trauma. I was absolutely not expected to survive the night. The bait was officially set. I was transported under a heavy police escort to the most exclusive, highly secure VIP intensive care unit at Chicago Memorial Hospital. The entire hospital floor was immediately locked down and cleared of any unnecessary medical personnel. Only a select, highly trusted team of doctors and nurses were thoroughly briefed on the covert operation. They worked with rapid professional precision to construct the ultimate medical theater around my bed. They hooked me up to an intimidating array of complex medical machinery. Electrodes were carefully taped to my chest to monitor my perfectly steady heart rate, while the screens displayed fabricated, critically low vitals to anyone casually walking into the room. A large, highly restrictive oxygen mask was strapped tightly over my mouth and nose, connected to a loud, rhythmic ventilator that hissed and pumped artificial air into my lungs. I allowed them to insert a harmless saline intravenous line into my uninjured arm to completely sell the illusion of a desperate, failing medical intervention. I looked like a broken man taking his final agonizing breaths on this earth. But the most critical piece of equipment in the room was not medical. The police captain had discreetly brought in a specialized technical unit. They meticulously installed a high-definition motion-activated microcamera directly inside the ventilation grate positioned dead center above my hospital bed. The lens pointed straight down, capturing a perfectly clear, unobstructed view of my body and anyone who approached the bedside. The video feed was wired directly to a secure tactical room down the hall where the police captain and his lead detective sat waiting, watching the live monitor with bated breath. I closed my eyes, regulating my breathing to perfectly match the mechanical rhythm of the artificial ventilator. The room fell into a heavy clinical silence, broken only by the sterile, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. I was fully conscious, completely aware of every single sound and movement around me. I lay perfectly still in the sterile hospital bed, my muscles coiled tight under the thin cotton blankets. The ultimate trap was fully armed and waiting. I just needed the predator to walk through the door. Hours crawled by in agonizing, absolute silence. The heavy digital clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, echoing through the sterile room. Then the heavy wooden door to my VIP suite clicked softly. The metal hinges creaked just a fraction of an inch, signaling an arrival. I kept my eyes completely shut, relying entirely on my hearing and the subtle shifts in the air currents within the room. Soft, highly deliberate footsteps moved across the polished linoleum floor, completely lacking the frantic, rushed panic of a grieving child rushing to their dying father's side. The footsteps stopped right next to the metal safety railing of my hospital bed. I could smell the familiar, expensive scent of Tasha's imported designer perfume, cutting sharply through the strong, sterile odor of the hospital antiseptics. I waited for the dramatic sobs. I waited for her to scream, for the doctors to hold my hand tightly to play the role of the devastated, broken daughter one last time for any potential onlookers. But there were no tears. There was no shaking voice. There was only a chilling, absolute silence as she stood over my seemingly lifeless body. I felt the ambient warmth of her body as she leaned in incredibly close to my face, her shadow blocking the harsh fluorescent lights above. The scent of her perfume grew overwhelmingly strong. I heard the faint rustle of her expensive silk clothing as she slowly raised her arm. Her perfectly manicured fingers gently brushed against the thick, corrugated plastic tubing of my artificial ventilator. She slowly traced the connection point where the life-giving oxygen flowed directly into my mask, her grip deliberately tightening around the vital plastic joint. "Thank you for the fortune, Daddy," she whispered, her voice a cold, emotionless void completely devoid of any human empathy or remorse. "You fought a very hard battle, but it is finally time to reunite with Mom." Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened their grip on the vital plastic joint, preparing to twist and disconnect my only source of oxygen. She leaned in closer, waiting for the final hiss of the machine to signal my end. She never got the chance. Before she could apply even an ounce of pressure to the tube, my right hand shot up from beneath the sterile white hospital blankets. My thick, calloused fingers, forged by 40 years of hauling concrete and steel, clamped down around her delicate wrist like a mechanical vice. I squeezed with a sudden bone-crushing force, completely immobilizing her arm in midair. Tasha let out a sharp, genuine shriek of pure physical agony, her body jerking backward in shock. But my grip was an unbreakable iron shackle. I slowly opened my eyes, dropping the lifeless facade entirely. I stared directly into the face of my treacherous daughter. The rhythmic, artificial hissing of the ventilator continued to pump harmlessly beside us, a stark contrast to the sudden explosive violence of the moment. I sat up slightly, pulling her terrified face down toward mine, letting her feel the absolute terrifying strength of a man who was very much alive. The color drained entirely from Tasha's face, replacing her cold, psychopathic confidence with a mask of absolute, unadulterated horror. Her eyes bulged wildly as she stared into mine, realizing she had just walked willingly into a devastating trap. She tried to pull her arm away, her high heels slipping desperately on the polished linoleum floor, but I only tightened my grip, ensuring she felt the raw consequence of her actions. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" I whispered, my voice a low, lethal rumble that cut through the clinical silence of the hospital room. "Did you honestly believe a cheap hit-and-run could finish the job your poisoned coffee started?" She stopped struggling, her breathing turning rapid and shallow. "You are supposed to be dying," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "I know everything, Tasha," I stated, cutting off her pathetic attempt at denial. "I know exactly how you manipulated Bradley into running that massive Ponzi scheme so you could siphon millions into your offshore accounts. I know you spiked Mark's coffee with methanol because he traced the stolen funds back to your personal Cayman Islands ledger. You orchestrated the murder of my best friend, and you tried to frame an innocent lawyer to cover your tracks." Tasha began to tremble uncontrollably, her arrogant posture completely collapsing under the crushing weight of the truth. I ripped the oxygen mask off my face with my free hand, letting it drop onto the bed. "But the most pathetic part of your entire grand design," I continued, leaning in so close she could not escape my gaze, "is your little solo escape plan. Did you really think I would not find the first-class airline ticket to Dubai? You pushed your husband into the crosshairs of a ruthless cartel, forced him to forge commercial deeds, and planned to abandon him to a gruesome death while you fled across the globe. You are not a criminal mastermind, Tasha. You are a cowardly scavenger feeding off the people who loved you." The absolute shock on her face confirmed that my psychological strike had hit its exact target. I had completely dismantled her entire secret reality piece by piece. She looked frantically toward the heavy wooden door, her mind desperately searching for an escape route, fully expecting a dozen police officers to rush into the room and place her in handcuffs. But the door remained firmly shut. The hidden camera above us was silently recording every second of this damning interaction, securing her ultimate downfall. But I was not ready to end this war inside a sterile private hospital suite. A private arrest was far too merciful for the daughter who had tried to bury me. "Please, Daddy," she whimpered, her voice reverting to a pathetic, childish tone as she tried to pull her crushed wrist from my iron grip. "I can explain everything. I was desperate. I will give the money back." I scoffed, a harsh, bitter sound that held zero fatherly affection. "You do not have a single dollar of my money left to give back. I transferred every liquid asset and commercial title into an untouchable international trust hours ago. You are completely broke, Tasha." Her eyes widened in fresh, agonizing panic as she realized her massive, carefully hoarded fortune had been vaporized instantly. I finally released my crushing grip on her wrist. She stumbled backward, cradling her bruised arm against her chest. I pointed a steady, commanding finger at her face. "I am not calling the police tonight. I am offering you one final, non-negotiable ultimatum. Tomorrow night is the annual Rollins Construction Anniversary Gala at the Downtown Grand Hotel. You will put on your most expensive dress. You will link arms with your pathetic husband. and you will both attend that party with a perfect, loving smile on your faces. If you try to run, if you attempt to board that flight to Dubai, or if you fail to show up at that gala for any reason whatsoever, I will immediately forward the crystal-clear audio recording of Bradley confessing to Mark's murder directly to the highest levels of the FBI. The federal agents will pull you off that airplane in handcuffs before you even buckle your seatbelt. You are going to face the public consequences of your actions in front of every business partner, investor, and friend we have ever known. Do you understand me? Tasha nodded frantically, tears of absolute terror streaming down her ruined face. Get out of my sight, I commanded, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. Tasha did not hesitate for a single second. She turned and bolted through the hospital door, fleeing the room like a terrified rat scrambling from a sinking ship. I watched the door swing shut, feeling a profound, cold satisfaction settling deeply into my bones. The trap was securely fastened, and the grand finale was perfectly set for tomorrow night. I spent the rest of the evening coordinating the final tactical details with the police captain, ensuring my public resurrection would be executed flawlessly. Late that night, as I sat in the dim light of the secure hospital suite, my newly acquired burner phone began to vibrate violently on the metal tray table. The caller identification displayed Bradley's personal number. I let it ring several times before finally accepting the call. The sound of sheer, unadulterated panic exploded through the small speaker. "Jake, please, you have to help me!" Bradley screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical terror. Loud, violent crashes echoed repeatedly in the background of the call. Someone was aggressively smashing heavy objects against a reinforced door. "Tasha is gone," he sobbed, completely abandoning any remaining shred of his arrogant pride. "She drained our joint emergency accounts and packed a bag. She left me here alone. The cartel is outside my house right now. They are breaking down the front door with sledgehammers. They want their $5 million. Jake and I do not have a single dime. Please, I will do anything. You have to save me." I listened to the sounds of splintering wood and Bradley's pathetic, desperate weeping. The arrogant puppet had finally realized that his strings had been ruthlessly cut by his own wife. The following evening, the grand ballroom of the downtown Grand Hotel was transformed into a dazzling spectacle of extreme wealth and corporate power. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of round tables draped in pristine white silk and decorated with towering floral arrangements. It was the highly anticipated 40th anniversary gala for Rollins Construction. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with the absolute highest tier of Chicago's financial elite. Powerful commercial bankers, influential city politicians, and my most trusted long-standing business partners mingled freely, sipping expensive imported champagne and discussing future urban developments. Soft jazz music floated through the air, creating an atmosphere of sophisticated, untouchable celebration. Everyone in attendance genuinely believed they were there to celebrate a massive corporate milestone. They had heard the sudden miraculous news of my rapid recovery from the supposed hit-and-run accident, and the room buzzed with relieved, admiring whispers about my physical resilience. They had absolutely no idea they had actually been invited to witness a highly orchestrated, utterly devastating public execution. The stage was perfectly set. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn back, revealing a massive high-definition LED screen that dominated the entire back wall of the ballroom, waiting for my command. Right on schedule, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Tasha walked into the magnificent room wearing a stunning floor-length emerald gown that clung perfectly to her figure. From a distance, she looked like the absolute picture of a proud, elegant corporate heiress ready to inherit an empire. But as she moved closer to the center of the room, the terrifying reality of her situation became glaringly obvious to anyone paying attention. Her smile was incredibly rigid, stretched so tight across her face that it looked physically painful. Her perfectly contoured cheekbones were hollow, and her eyes darted frantically around the room, constantly scanning the emergency exits and the broad-shouldered security guards posted by every single door. She was a cornered predator, completely trapped in a luxurious cage of her own making. She knew that if she made a single sudden move toward the exit, the audio files would be sent to the authorities immediately. She was forced to walk among the elite, playing her part in this glamorous, suffocating nightmare. Far away from the bright centerpieces and the flashing cameras of the local financial press, Bradley lurked in the darkest, most isolated corner of the ballroom. He looked absolutely atrocious. The man who usually obsessed over bespoke Italian suits and imported silk ties was currently wearing a severely wrinkled, poorly fitting jacket. His face was ghostly pale, covered in a heavy sheen of cold sweat, and a dark, jagged bruise colored his left cheekbone from his terrifying, violent encounter with the cartel the night before. I had arranged for a specialized private security team to physically extract him from his besieged house just seconds before the hitmen broke through his front door, dragging him directly to this hotel under heavy guard. He stood completely frozen beside a decorative marble pillar, his hands trembling so violently that he could not even hold a glass of water. He stared at Tasha from across the room with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred and absolute terror. The golden couple of Chicago's venture capital scene had been reduced to a pair of terrified, broken criminals waiting for the heavy blade of justice to finally fall. The soft jazz music slowly faded away as the event coordinator tapped a microphone on the main stage, signaling for the guests to take their seats. A hush fell over the massive ballroom. I walked confidently out from the backstage VIP wing and stepped up to the polished wooden podium. I did not lean on a cane. I did not shuffle my feet or slump my shoulders. I stood completely upright, projecting the raw, undeniable authority of a man who had built a massive concrete empire from the dirt up. I wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo that emphasized my broad chest and strong posture. The room erupted into a deafening round of applause and a massive standing ovation celebrating my supposed miraculous recovery from the brink of death. I raised my hands slowly, allowing the room to quiet down completely before I leaned into the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight." I began, my voice a deep, resonant boom that echoed perfectly through the crystal-clear sound system. 40 years ago, I poured my very first concrete foundation in this great city. I built Rollins Construction on the uncompromising pillars of absolute trust, fierce loyalty, and family. And speaking of family, I want to take a very special moment to recognize my daughter, Tasha. I gestured grandly toward the front table. The spotlight instantly swung over, illuminating her rigid, terrified face for all the elite guests to see. Tasha has been an absolute revelation to me recently. I continued, my words dripping with a heavy, cutting sarcasm that went completely unnoticed by the clapping audience, but struck her like brutal physical blows. She has shown me the true, terrifying depths of human ambition. She has demonstrated exactly how far a person is willing to go to secure their own future and how easily they can cut ties with the people who gave them life. She has taught me that the people closest to you are the ones capable of the most breathtaking, life-altering surprises. The audience politely clapped again, assuming I was offering the standard loving praise of a proud father passing the torch. Tasha stared back at me, her skin turning the color of chalk. She knew exactly what every single word truly meant. She knew I was publicly dissecting her psychopathic betrayal right in front of the most powerful, influential people in the entire city. I reached out and picked up a crystal flute of sparkling champagne from the edge of the podium. I raised the glass high into the air, demanding the absolute, undivided attention of every single person in the grand ballroom. "So please raise your glasses with me," I commanded, my voice dropping the celebratory tone, entirely turning incredibly cold and sharp, echoing with a lethal, terrifying finality. "Let us toast to the undeniable truth and to the absolute certainty that every single debt, no matter how carefully hidden, eventually comes due." I took a slow sip of the champagne and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to the technical director I had personally hired for the evening. The bright, warm house lights instantly snapped off, plunging the massive ballroom into total, suffocating darkness. Gasps of shock and confusion rippled through the elite crowd. A second later, the gigantic LED screen behind me flashed with a blinding, stark white light. But it did not play the highly anticipated corporate documentary celebrating my 40 years in business. Instead, the screen displayed the crystal-clear, high-definition, hidden camera footage from my living room. The giant image of Tasha violently slapping Bradley across the face illuminated the entire hall in bright, aggressive colors. Her vicious, cruel voice boomed through the massive surround sound speakers with deafening volume. "Make that old man go crazy faster. Spike his food. Break his mind." The crowd erupted into a chaotic chorus of sheer horror and disbelief. Then the screen transitioned to a stark black background as a new audio file began to play. It was Bradley's arrogant, trembling voice captured flawlessly by the device under my desk. We watched him drink every last drop. He did not suspect a single thing until his heart gave out on the kitchen floor. The absolute undeniable confession to Mark's brutal murder vibrated through the bones of every single guest in the room, shattering Tasha's entire world into a million unfixable pieces. The brutal confession echoed off the crystal chandeliers. The crisp audio left absolutely zero room for interpretation or doubt. We watched him drink every last drop. Those vile, venomous words hung suspended in the chilled air of the grand ballroom like a physical weight. For a long, agonizing second, the hundreds of elite guests held their breath in collective, paralyzed horror. No one moved. No one spoke. The sheer magnitude of the evil they had just witnessed completely shattered the refined, sophisticated atmosphere of the gala. Then the paralysis broke, and absolute chaos erupted. At the front tables, reserved for the most powerful financial backers in Chicago, the reaction was instantaneous and violently decisive. Senior banking executives stared at the giant screen with undisguised disgust. I watched a prominent loan officer reach across the white silk tablecloth. He picked up a multi-million-dollar credit extension contract that Tasha had been desperately trying to secure and tore it directly down the middle. He did not say a single word to her. He simply let the shredded pieces flutter onto the floor. It was a definitive, brutal end to her financial lifeline. The corporate world was instantly turning its back on her. Tasha's perfect, arrogant composure finally completely collapsed. It shattered into a million jagged pieces of pure, unadulterated panic. She leaped up from her chair, knocking over a crystal champagne flute that shattered against the marble floor. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. Her voice cracked into a shrill, manic pitch that cut violently through the murmurs of the crowd. "Turn that garbage off right now!" she yelled. She pointed a trembling, desperate finger at the giant LED screen and then spun around to face the horrified audience. "It is fake," she screamed while her eyes darted wildly from table to table. "It is all digitally fabricated." She claimed I used artificial intelligence and deepfake technology to frame my own daughter because I was losing my mind. She said I was trying to destroy her to hide my own senile dementia. She practically lunged toward the table of city politicians and high-powered investors she had been charming just minutes prior. "Please, you have to listen to me," she begged. She aggressively grabbed the arm of a state senator who quickly yanked his sleeve away as if her touch was highly infectious. She pleaded that they knew how sophisticated technology is today. She reminded them that I suffered a massive brain injury and claimed I was completely delusional. She said I manufactured those recordings to steal her inheritance and ruin her reputation. She frantically scanned the room with her chest heaving as she desperately searched for a single sympathetic face among the hundreds of influential guests. But there was no sympathy to be found. The elite circles of Chicago are built on fierce self-preservation. Every single person in that ballroom knew a sinking ship when they saw one. They looked at her with pure revulsion and backed away slowly. They created a physical and highly visible circle of isolation around her. Nobody was going to risk their own pristine reputation to defend a woman whose own father had just publicly exposed her as a cold-blooded murderer. She was drowning in a sea of her own lies and grasping at invisible straws while the entire room watched her suffocate. I stood at the podium, looking down at her frantic, pathetic display, with eyes as cold as the bottom of the ocean. "You cannot deepfake the truth, Tasha," I said. My voice projected clearly over the sound system. "And you cannot outrun the consequences of your own greed." As the final syllable of my sentence echoed through the massive surround sound speakers, the heavy gilded double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom violently burst open. The sudden explosive sound snapped everyone's attention to the back of the hall. A heavily armed, highly coordinated squad of federal agents marched aggressively into the room. They moved in perfect tactical formation with their dark windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI. The crowd instantly parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide, unobstructed path directly to the front tables. Leading the charge was a tall, broad-shouldered senior inspector with a sharp, no-nonsense glare that commanded immediate, absolute compliance. He bypassed the terrified guests and marched straight toward Tasha, stopping just a few feet away from her trembling figure. "Tasha Rollins Sutton," he barked with his voice carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of federal authority. "You are under arrest." He pulled a thick stack of official, heavily stamped warrants from his jacket pocket and raised them up for the entire ballroom to witness. He announced that they had secured federal indictments charging her with orchestrating a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, along with wire fraud and severe corporate embezzlement. Furthermore, he stated they had direct authorization for her arrest regarding the targeted falsification of medical records and extreme elder abuse. Finally, he announced the charge for the premeditated first-degree murder of Mark Holloway. Tasha staggered backward as her high heels scraped loudly against the polished marble floor. She shook her head frantically while her perfectly styled hair fell into a messy, chaotic tangle around her face. "No," she gasped, holding her hands up as if she could physically block the words coming from the inspector's mouth. She told him he had this entirely wrong and that he could not arrest her. She babbled that she was a prominent business owner with highly connected lawyers and diplomatic immunity. Her panicked, nonsensical rambling only cemented her profound guilt in front of the silent, watching crowd. The inspector signaled to two grim-faced agents flanking him. They stepped forward, reaching for their heavy metal handcuffs. "We have fully seized your offshore banking accounts in the Cayman Islands," the inspector added coldly while entirely ignoring her frantic protests. "We have also intercepted your one-way flight itinerary to Dubai. You are not going anywhere because your entire criminal enterprise has been completely dismantled." The cold reality of federal prison finally crashed down upon Tasha, completely shattering the last remnants of her arrogant facade. As the federal agents grabbed her arms to pull them behind her back, she twisted violently and unleashed a desperate, piercing scream that shook the crystal chandeliers. "I did not do it," she shrieked, pointing a manic, shaking finger blindly toward the back of the room. "It was my husband Bradley," she yelled. She claimed he was the one running the fraudulent venture capital firm and the one who bought the poison. She frantically told the agents that he forced her to buy that plane ticket because she was trying to escape from his abuse. She called him the mastermind and demanded they arrest him instead of her. She expected her final desperate lie to buy her a sliver of time or a momentary distraction she could use to negotiate. But the FBI inspector simply let out a low, humorless chuckle. A figure slowly emerged from the dark shadows behind the wall of federal agents. It was Bradley. He stepped fully into the bright light, flanked tightly by two armed United States Marshals. He looked thoroughly broken as a pathetic shadow of the arrogant man who had threatened my life, but his eyes held a grim, undeniable certainty. "I already gave them everything, Tasha," he said, with his voice trembling but loud enough for her to hear. "I handed over the encrypted hard drives and the offshore routing numbers along with the original financial blueprints you designed to steal your father's wealth." He looked at the inspector and then back to his horrified wife. "I surrendered myself directly to the federal authorities this morning," he declared. "I signed a full comprehensive immunity deal in exchange for my absolute cooperation. I am the federal government's star witness, Tasha, and I am testifying against you." The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Tasha's delicate wrists echoed like a final gunshot through the silent ballroom. It was the definitive sound of her total destruction. The elegant emerald gown she wore suddenly looked like a tragic, ill-fitting costume on a completely broken woman. Her carefully constructed empire of lies, her stolen millions, and her boundless psychopathic arrogance all crumbled to absolute dust in a matter of seconds. The elite guests, the very people she had spent years desperately trying to impress and manipulate, stood frozen in a wide circle around her. They watched with undisguised contempt as the federal agents forcefully pinned her arms behind her back. She was no longer the powerful heiress of the Rollins commercial real estate dynasty. She was nothing more than a common violent criminal caught dead to rights in front of the entire city. The glittering crystal chandeliers above seemed to cast a harsh, unforgiving spotlight entirely on her downfall. The absolute humiliation was profound and inescapable. Every single ounce of leverage she thought she possessed had been meticulously stripped away, leaving her utterly exposed and completely powerless against the crushing weight of federal justice. Realizing that her husband had completely betrayed her and that her offshore accounts were permanently seized, Tasha finally broke. She was entirely backed into an inescapable corner with absolutely zero moves left to play. So she played her final, most desperate card. She threw her dignity away and collapsed heavily onto her knees right there on the polished marble floor. The federal agents tried to pull her back up, but she went entirely limp, dragging her weight downward as she turned her tear-streaked face toward the stage. "Daddy!" she wailed, her voice tearing through the cavernous room in a raw, pathetic display of manufactured agony. "Please, Daddy, you cannot let them do this to me. You are my father. I am your only child." Her sobs grew louder, echoing off the walls as she frantically tried to summon the ghost of the unconditional parental love she had so ruthlessly exploited. She begged me to call off the agents, insisting that the evidence was completely out of context and that she was merely a victim of bad circumstances and a terrible marriage. When she realized I was not moving a single inch, she shifted her tactic from denial to absolute desperation. "I will change, Daddy. I swear to God I will change," she screamed, thrashing wildly against the firm grip of the federal agents holding her shoulders. "I was greedy, I was scared, but I can fix this. We can fix this together. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to rot in a federal prison. I am your daughter. You carried me. You raised me. Please, I am begging you to save my life," she cried hysterically, letting the heavy tears ruin her flawless makeup, desperately hoping that the sheer public embarrassment of her begging would force me to intervene and protect our family name. She genuinely believed that the biological tie between us was a magical, unbreakable shield that would ultimately grant her total immunity from her monstrous crimes. She thought my heart was still capable of breaking for her. She had absolutely no idea that the father who loved her was already gone, buried in the exact same cold earth where she had put my best friend. I did not say a single word from the stage. I slowly stepped out from behind the polished wooden podium and walked down the short flight of stairs to the main ballroom floor. The crowd of elite bankers and politicians parted silently, stepping back to give me a wide, unobstructed path to my kneeling daughter. I walked with the slow, deliberate, and towering presence of a judge approaching the execution block. I stopped exactly 2 feet away from her. I looked down at the pathetic, sobbing woman on the marble floor. My face was a mask of absolute granite. My eyes held the deep, terrifying stillness of an open grave. There was zero anger left in me. There was no sadness. There was only a cold, mechanical necessity to excise a terminal disease from my life forever. Tasha looked up at me, her chest heaving, her eyes searching frantically for a single flicker of mercy in my stoic expression. She found absolutely nothing but empty, freezing darkness. "You talk about flesh and blood," I said, my voice low, dangerous, and incredibly steady, carrying a lethal finality that made even the seasoned federal agents stand completely still. "You dare to invoke the sacred bond of family to shield yourself from the consequences of your own bottomless greed." I leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between us, so she could hear every single syllable with terrifying clarity. "That bond of blood died the exact night you poured lethal poison into Mark's coffee. It died the minute you looked into my eyes at the cemetery and smiled while throwing away my life-saving medication. It died when you orchestrated the total destruction of my entire life so you could fly to Dubai with a bank account full of stolen money." Tasha let out a choked, terrified gasp, shrinking back from the pure, unadulterated ice in my voice. "You are not my daughter." I continued, standing perfectly upright again, projecting my voice so the entire silent ballroom could hear my ultimate binding verdict. "You are a parasite that I have permanently removed from my host. This commercial building, this massive corporate empire, and the entirety of my family legacy have absolutely no place for demons. Take her out of my sight right now." The FBI inspector nodded firmly at my command. He grabbed Tasha by the arms and hauled her aggressively to her feet. She began to scream and thrash wildly again, but the agents flanked her, tightly dragging her forcefully toward the heavy double doors of the ballroom. Bradley was escorted right behind her by the armed United States Marshals, keeping his head completely bowed, entirely shattered by his own cowardice and the horrific reality of his impending prison sentence. I watched them disappear into the main lobby, listening as Tasha's hysterical, manic shrieks slowly faded away into the distance. The suffocating, toxic weight that had been crushing my chest for weeks finally lifted completely. The grand ballroom remained perfectly silent for a long moment before a familiar, dignified figure stepped out from the shadows near the entrance. It was Richard Hayes. He was no longer in handcuffs, and he did not look like a defeated, framed man. He wore a sharp, immaculate suit, and his posture was towering and victorious. The federal authorities had completely cleared his name the moment Bradley handed over the master encrypted hard drives proving Tasha's complex, fraudulent frame job. Richard walked purposefully across the marble floor, a warm, genuine smile breaking across his usually stoic face. He stopped right in front of me, reaching deep into his tailored jacket pocket. He did not hand me a legal brief or a court summons. Instead, he pulled out a single gleaming silver car key attached to a vintage leather fob. He pressed the heavy metal key directly into my palm, closing my fingers securely around it. "Justice is finally served, Jake," Richard said quietly, his voice thick with profound respect and unwavering loyalty. "But our work tonight is not entirely finished. Mark anticipated everything, and he left one final incredible gift for you waiting right now down in the underground parking garage." I left the absolute chaos of the grand ballroom behind me, stepping into the quiet, sterile elevator that would take me down to the subterranean parking garage of the Grand Hotel. The heavy adrenaline that had fueled my public execution of Tasha and Bradley was slowly beginning to recede, leaving behind a profound, hollow exhaustion. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. The underground garage was a vast, echoing cavern of concrete illuminated by rows of flickering, pale yellow sodium lights. I walked slowly across the empty structure, my footsteps echoing against the damp walls. Following Richard's precise directions, I headed toward the deepest, most isolated corner of the VIP parking sector. There, resting quietly under the dim amber glow of a solitary spotlight, was a pristine, midnight blue 1968 Chevrolet Corvette. The breath caught completely in my throat. It was not just a similar model, it was my exact car. It was the mechanical masterpiece I had spent my entire youth restoring with my own two hands. I had been forced to sell it decades ago to pay for Tasha's private university tuition when my construction company had hit a brutal financial slump. I had sacrificed my ultimate dream to build a foundation for the very daughter who had just tried to murder me. I walked up to the gleaming driver's side door, my thick, calloused fingers trembling slightly as I traced the flawless, cold curve of the fiberglass fender. The sheer impossibility of it all struck me like a physical blow. Mark, my brilliant, incredibly loyal best friend, had tracked down the exact vehicle I had sold to a wealthy collector all those years ago. He had quietly purchased it back, spending an absolute fortune to restore it to showroom perfection, intending to return a piece of my stolen youth. I unlocked the heavy door and slid into the low bucket seat. The familiar smell of aged leather and high-octane gasoline instantly transported me back 30 years. Resting directly on the center of the polished steering wheel was a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name written in Mark's distinct, bold handwriting. I picked it up, feeling a fresh wave of grief threaten to crack my stoic exterior. I tore open the heavy paper and pulled out a single handwritten letter. Jake. The letter began, the words jumping off the page with Mark's signature commanding tone. If you are sitting in this driver's seat reading this, it means you survived the storm. It means you figured out the absolute nightmare brewing in your own home, and you successfully crushed those greedy, backstabbing scumbags. I knew you would, old friend. You are the strongest man I have ever met. I bought this car back for you months ago. I was waiting for your 70th birthday to give it to you, but things have obviously escalated. Do not let their betrayal destroy your spirit, Jake. You sacrificed everything for a daughter who did not deserve a single ounce of your love. But your life is not over. Your legacy is not defined by their failures. Drive this car, Jake. Put the top down, hit the gas, and finally live the glorious, unrestrained life you missed out on because you were too busy taking care of everyone else. I am riding shotgun with you in spirit. A complex, overwhelming mixture of agonizing pain and absolute soaring freedom crashed through my chest. I sat there in the quiet underground garage, clutching the heavy parchment paper, allowing myself a single silent moment to mourn the brilliant man who had penned those final words. Mark had fought for me until his dying breath. He had used his last remaining days on this earth to build a fortress around my life, ensuring I would emerge victorious even after he was gone. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it deep into the breast pocket of my tailored tuxedo right next to my beating heart. I gripped the polished wood of the classic steering wheel with both hands. The cold, mechanical reality of the machine grounded me instantly. I was done grieving. I was done being a victim. I was done sacrificing my entire existence for parasites who viewed my life as nothing more than a heavily funded bank account waiting to be drained. I inserted the heavy silver key into the ignition cylinder. I turned it firmly. The massive high-performance V8 engine did not just start. It violently erupted to life with a deafening, thunderous roar that shook the very concrete pillars of the parking garage. The aggressive mechanical growl of the engine was a primal, undeniable battle cry. It was the definitive sound of my absolute rebirth. I revved the engine, letting the sheer, terrifying power of the machine vibrate through my entire body. I dropped the heavy transmission into gear and the classic sports car surged forward aggressively. The tires screeched against the slick concrete floor as I navigated the tight turns of the underground structure. I accelerated up the steep exit ramp, bursting out of the dark subterranean cavern and directly into the cool, crisp night air of downtown Chicago. The brilliant, towering city lights reflected beautifully off the pristine midnight blue hood of the car. I gripped the wheel tightly, steering the powerful vehicle onto the busy main avenue. I had completely crushed my enemies. I had secured my multi-million-dollar empire in an impenetrable offshore fortress. I was completely free. I shifted smoothly into third gear, feeling the heavy, thrilling push of gravity against my chest as I merged onto the fast lane of the glowing urban expressway. The cool night wind rushed aggressively through the open windows, clearing the lingering scent of the hotel's expensive champagne from my lungs. I was navigating the tight urban corners with the practiced muscle memory of my youth, leaving the chaotic fallout of the grand ballroom far behind me. But as I glanced up into the rearview mirror to check my blind spot, my heart instantly skipped a beat. The profound sense of victorious freedom evaporated in a fraction of a second. 2 lanes over, rapidly weaving aggressively through the dense city traffic, was a massive matte black SUV. It had heavily tinted windows, reinforced steel bumpers, and absolutely no license plates. It was the exact same model of the vehicle that had tried to crush me against a fire hydrant earlier that very morning. Tasha and Bradley were currently sitting in federal holding cells, their entire criminal enterprise completely dismantled. But they had left one massive, incredibly violent loose end completely untied. Bradley's spectacular failure to secure my signature on the commercial deeds meant that the ruthless cartel he owed $5 million to was still completely unpaid. The hitmen had not been arrested by the FBI. They had not been deterred by the flashy federal raid at the gala. They were furious, highly motivated, and tracking the only remaining target tied to Bradley's massive debt. They did not care that my son-in-law was in federal custody. They simply wanted their money, and they had clearly decided to collect it in blood from the wealthy father-in-law. The black SUV violently swerved into my lane, accelerating aggressively until its heavy steel grille filled my entire rearview mirror, preparing to run me completely off the road. The massive black SUV did not just ride my bumper, it aggressively slammed into the rear quarter panel of my pristine Corvette, forcing me completely out of my lane. Sparks showered the dark highway as metal scraped violently against metal. I fought the steering wheel, trying to use the classic car's agility to outmaneuver the heavy beast, but the sheer size of their vehicle was overwhelming. They forcefully boxed me out, pushing me off the main expressway and violently funneling me down a desolate, unlit off-ramp. We tore into the abandoned industrial warehouse district, far away from the glowing city lights and any potential witnesses. The SUV suddenly surged forward, clipping my front fender and skidding diagonally across the cracked asphalt, completely blocking the narrow street. I slammed on the brakes, the Corvette screeching to a violently abrupt halt just inches from their reinforced steel bumper. Before the tire smoke could even clear, the 4 heavy doors of the SUV swung open simultaneously. 5 massive men stepped out into the freezing night air. They were dressed in dark tactical gear, their faces completely obscured by the shadows. Every single one of them was holding a suppressed automatic weapon. They moved with silent, lethal precision, fanning out and entirely surrounding my vehicle, cutting off absolutely every avenue of escape. The leader of the hit squad slowly detached himself from the group and casually walked up to the driver's side door. He was a mountain of a man with cold, dead eyes and a jagged scar running down the side of his jaw. He did not yell or act frantic like Bradley. He operated with the terrifying, absolute calm of a professional killer who had done this 100 times before. He raised his suppressed tactical pistol and sharply tapped the heavy steel barrel directly against my driver's side window. The sharp metallic clinking sound echoed ominously in the dead silence of the abandoned industrial district. I did not raise my hands. I kept them resting casually on the polished wooden steering wheel, staring straight ahead through the glass. "Roll it down," the leader commanded, his voice muffled but undeniably lethal. I did not move. "We know all about the grand show you put on tonight at the hotel," the leader continued, leaning in closer so his face was inches from the glass. "We know your pathetic son-in-law is currently singing to the feds, and we know you locked up your daughter's accounts. But the cartel does not care about the FBI, and we certainly do not care about your family drama. Bradley owes our employers $5 million. Since you decided to play God and take away our primary source of payment, that massive debt officially transfers directly to the family patriarch. You are a very rich man, Jake. You are going to pay the $5 million right now, or you are not going to survive the night." He casually racked the slide of his pistol, chambering around with a terrifyingly loud mechanical click. "We will burn you alive inside this pretty little classic car, and we will hunt down every single person who ever worked for your construction company until the debt is settled in full. Open the window and pay what you owe." I slowly pressed the button on the door panel, letting the glass window roll down with a smooth mechanical whir. The freezing night air instantly rushed into the cabin, carrying the distinct metallic scent of gun oil and the imminent threat of death. I looked the scarred killer dead in the eye. I did not show a single ounce of fear, panic, or submission. I had stared down the barrel of my own mortality repeatedly over the last 48 hours, and I was absolutely done being intimidated by greedy men holding weapons. I did not reach for my wallet, and I did not beg for my life. Instead, I calmly reached over to the passenger seat. Resting on the leather upholstery was a heavy military-grade encrypted tablet prepared specifically by Richard's private investigator for this exact terrifying scenario. I picked up the heavy device and forcefully shoved it directly into the chest of the cartel leader. The sudden aggressive movement surprised him. He instinctively took a half step back, catching the tablet with his free hand while keeping the pistol leveled steadily at my head. "What the hell is this?" he growled, his dead eyes narrowing in deep suspicion. I kept my posture completely relaxed, leaning my left arm comfortably on the open window frame. "That is your payment," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute uncompromising authority. "My daughter Tasha is a highly manipulative psychopathic thief. You already know she planned to abandon her husband and steal your money. What you do not know is that she was significantly smarter than the federal agents who arrested her tonight. She did not keep all her stolen millions in the Cayman Islands. She meticulously set up a decentralized, completely untraceable ghost account in a private Swiss bank as her ultimate fail-safe escape fund. The FBI does not know it exists, and it was entirely untouched by the asset freezes tonight. The tablet in your hand is currently logged directly into that specific Swiss banking portal. I have already bypassed the biometric security protocols using her digital footprint. The money sitting in that account is completely unencumbered, thoroughly laundered, and entirely ready for an immediate anonymous global transfer. You wanted $5 million. It is sitting right there in the palm of your hand. The money is in there, I said, maintaining my unbreakable eye contact with the heavily armed killer. Exactly $5 million down to the final cent. Collect the debt from the treacherous cowards who actually scammed you. Do not touch the man who just threw them in a federal prison and handed you the keys to the vault." The cartel leader stared at me for a long, tense moment, trying to detect any sign of deception in my voice. Finding absolutely none, he slowly lowered the barrel of his suppressed pistol. He looked down at the glowing screen of the tablet and began tapping through the highly secure banking portal. The harsh blue light illuminated his scarred face in the darkness. I watched his eyes scan the financial ledger. His rigid, aggressive posture slowly began to relax. A slow, deeply satisfied smile stretched across his face as he verified the massive account balance. The money was real, and the transfer protocol was fully unlocked. He tapped a final sequence of commands, aggressively initiating the untraceable wire transfer directly into the cartel's own dark money accounts. A bright green confirmation screen flashed brilliantly in the night. The leader let out a low, approving chuckle. He looked back up at me, his eyes gleaming with a dark, professional respect. He raised his hand and gave a sharp, silent hand signal to his men. Instantly, the 4 heavily armed soldiers lowered their tactical weapons and piled efficiently back into the massive black SUV. The leader casually tossed the now useless tablet through the open window, landing it perfectly on my passenger seat. He gave me a crisp, 2-finger salute, turned on his heel, and climbed into the passenger side of his vehicle. The heavy SUV aggressively reversed out of the alleyway, its tires screeching loudly before speeding off into the desolate industrial night, vanishing completely into the shadows. I sat alone in the quiet hum of my classic car. I had just used my treacherous daughter's own dirty stolen money to permanently sweep away the final threat to my life. 6 months passed in a blur of aggressive legal proceedings and massive corporate restructuring. I sat in my newly appointed executive office, the heavy flat-screen television playing the morning news on low volume. The anchor's voice cut sharply through the quiet room, announcing the final sentencing in the highest-profile fraud and murder case Chicago had seen in a decade. The screen flashed detailed courtroom sketches of Tasha and Bradley. The federal judge had shown absolutely zero mercy. Tasha Rollins Sutton was sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for orchestrating the massive Ponzi scheme, committing extreme medical fraud, and executing the premeditated murder of Mark Holloway. Bradley Sutton, despite his desperate cooperation with the federal authorities, was handed a 12-year sentence for his direct role in the financial conspiracy and the poisoning. There would be no early parole hearings. There would be no luxurious white-collar resort prison. They were going to spend the absolute best years of their lives rotting in tiny concrete cells behind heavy iron bars, stripped of every single comfort they had violently stolen to acquire. I watched their panicked, broken faces flash across the screen one last time and felt absolutely nothing but a cold, satisfying closure. I did not return to the sprawling suburban estate that I had once called my home. The heavy walls of that house were deeply infected with the toxic memories of Tasha's psychopathic lies and Bradley's pathetic, greedy plotting. I hired a premium liquidation firm to completely clear out the property, aggressively selling every piece of furniture and putting the massive estate on the market. It sold in less than a week to an out-of-state buyer. I took the capital and purchased one of the most exclusive high-security penthouses in the absolute center of downtown Chicago. My new home was a towering fortress of floor-to-ceiling glass and polished steel, offering a commanding panoramic view of the entire city skyline. I did not retreat into a quiet, peaceful retirement. The fire that had been reignited in my blood during that brutal war refused to burn out. I stepped firmly back into the chief executive chair of Rollins Construction, bringing the entire offshore trust back under a newly formed, ironclad domestic corporate structure. I did not do it alone. Richard Hayes, completely cleared of all federal suspicion and thoroughly vindicated, stepped in as my newly appointed chief operating officer and primary legal counsel. Together, we ruthlessly purged the company of any lingering associates connected to Bradley's fraudulent network. We expanded our commercial development projects, dominating the Chicago real estate market with an aggressive, uncompromising vision. We built state-of-the-art medical centers, towering residential complexes, and thriving commercial hubs. The empire I had forged with my own calloused hands was no longer a quiet, stagnant portfolio waiting to be inherited by patient vultures. It was a massive, living, breathing machine operating at peak efficiency. I walked through my corporate headquarters every day with my head held high, surrounded by employees who respected the undeniable resilience of a man who had fought a brutal war against his own blood and emerged absolutely victorious. My new life was completely devoid of the parasitic drains that had secretly plagued my previous existence. There were no more fake smiles over morning coffee, no more forged documents hidden in briefcases, and absolutely no more compromises made in the name of a toxic family bond. I was rebuilding my legacy exactly the way Mark and I had originally envisioned it, but the accumulation of massive wealth was no longer my primary driving force. I had stared down the darkest, most terrifying depths of elder financial abuse, and I knew exactly how easily a lifetime of hard work could be violently ripped away by the people you trusted the most. I sat at the massive mahogany conference table in my penthouse office, the morning sunlight reflecting brilliantly off the glass walls. Richard placed a thick stack of legally binding corporate documents in front of me. I picked up my heavy gold fountain pen, the exact same style of pen Tasha had tried to force into my trembling hand months ago. My grip was rock solid. With a few swift, decisive strokes, I fundamentally restructured the entire financial trajectory of Rollins Construction. I signed a permanent, irrevocable mandate transferring 70% of the corporation's annual net profits directly into a newly established, massively funded charitable foundation. I named it the Holloway Rollins Trust. It was not a vanity project or a temporary tax write-off. It was a heavily armed, highly aggressive legal and financial shield designed specifically to protect vulnerable elderly citizens from the exact same predatory family members who had tried to destroy me. The foundation employed an elite, highly paid task force of private investigators, aggressive corporate lawyers, and specialized forensic accountants. We provided free, immediate legal intervention for seniors facing fraudulent guardianship claims, unauthorized asset liquidation, and medical coercion. I was actively funding the total destruction of financial predators across the entire state. I was ensuring that no other father, mother, or best friend would ever have to lie trapped in a hospital bed, wondering if their own children were going to pull the plug for a quick payout. We aggressively pursued cases against manipulative relatives, ensuring they faced severe federal prosecution, just like my daughter. I took the absolute worst, most agonizing betrayal of my entire life and forged it into an unbreakable weapon of mass protection. The pain of losing Mark and the horror of my daughter's psychopathic greed no longer haunted my sleepless nights. I had weaponized my grief, turning my personal survival into a ruthless crusade for justice that would actively shield the innocent and outlast my lifetime by generations. Late that evening, the vibrant lights of Chicago illuminated the dark night sky, painting the city in brilliant strokes of amber and neon blue. I stood alone on the expansive glass balcony of my penthouse, feeling the cool, crisp wind sweeping off Lake Michigan. The deafening roar of the city traffic below was a constant, powerful reminder of the relentless pulse of life. In my right hand, I held a heavy crystal tumbler filled with a generous pour of premium-aged Kentucky bourbon. Resting on the small marble table beside me was a polished silver frame containing a photograph of Mark and me standing proudly in front of our very first construction site 40 years ago. I raised my glass toward the photograph, acknowledging the brilliant, loyal man who had given his life to protect mine. "We won, old friend," I said quietly, the sound of my voice carrying a profound, absolute peace. I took a slow, burning sip of the expensive liquor. I had meticulously cleaned the toxic trash out of my life. There was no lingering guilt. There was no desire for compromise. There was absolutely no room for forgiveness. I had stared directly into the eyes of absolute evil, cut it out of my world without a single ounce of hesitation, and built a towering fortress on top of its ashes. The predators who thought they could bury me were locked inside concrete cages while I stood on top of the world. The city below me belonged to those strong enough to survive it. I took one final look at the glowing skyline, finished my drink, and walked back inside, ready to conquer whatever tomorrow brought. At 69 years old, I was not fading into the quiet twilight of my life. My true reign had only just begun. If there is one ultimate lesson I learned from this nightmare, it is that blood does not automatically grant someone the right to your life, your wealth, or your peace. We are conditioned to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, but true loyalty is forged through mutual respect and honorable actions, not mere genetics. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is having the absolute courage to walk away from the toxic people who share your last name. You owe nothing to those who view you as a disposable resource instead of a living, breathing human being. If my story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences with setting firm boundaries in the comments below.